Greetings, seekers of ancient absurdities. Tonight we embark on a whirlwind tour through humanity's greatest empires and their spectacularly messy failures. Forget the glorious timelines, we're focused on the faceplants. From Egypt's pyramid schemes to Rome's political blunders, this is a history of what happens when grand ambition meets tectonic stupidity. If this chaotic journey into the past helps you find peace, you must subscribe to this channel right now. It is the only way we can continue unearthing these delightfully dreadful stories. Now, dim the lights and prepare for truly bizarre history. For 10,000 years, humanity did the sensible thing, it wandered. If the weather turned foul, you moved. If your neighbors became tedious, you moved. If the giant prehistoric badgers started getting organized, you definitely moved. Life was simple, unburdened by property taxes and jury duty. But then, somewhere around the 4000 before the Common Era, a group of people in the sun-scorched plains of the Near East had a truly terrible idea. What if, they presumably said, leaning on a stick and watching the dust blow, we stopped all this sensible wandering and built a permanent home right here, in this dusty, flood-prone, indefensible patch of dirt? It was a decision that would change the world, and frankly, make life a lot more complicated for everyone. This is the story of that questionable choice, the dawn of what we call civilization. Welcome to Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a place so flat and featureless you could watch your dog run away for 3 days. They call it the cradle of civilization, which is a rather gentle term for what was, in essence, a chaotic, mud-caked laboratory for all of humanity's best and worst ideas. Here, in this fertile yet furious crescent of land, our ancestors decided to trade the freedom of the open road for the dubious comforts of city walls, neighbors who borrow your tools and never return them, and the novel experience of being ruled by someone other than their own bad judgment. It was a bold experiment, a gamble that they could outsmart the relentless floods, the searing heat, and the constant threat of being conquered by the next group of people who thought building a city looked like a good idea. The first to really give it a go were the Sumerians, a people of prodigious and often peculiar genius. They looked at the endless mud and saw bricks. They looked at the chaos of bartering and invented writing, primarily, it seems, to keep track of who owed whom how much grain. This, of course, led to the invention of bureaucracy, and surely, the world's first ever late fee. They gave us the wheel, a revolutionary invention that made it significantly easier to haul heavy loads of stone and, even more significantly, to flee from the armies of the Akkadians who were about to conquer them. They were the original innovators, the pioneers who laid the groundwork for everything to come, blissfully unaware that most of their innovations would eventually be used to create more efficient ways to kill each other and collect taxes. Life in Sumer was a constant struggle against forces both natural and supernatural. The Tigris and Euphrates were fickle benefactors. One season they would bless the land with life-giving water and silt. The next, they would rise in a furious, muddy torrent, washing away entire cities and all the meticulously recorded deaths. This led the Sumerians to a rather grim conclusion about the divine. Their gods weren't benevolent caretakers. They were powerful, petulant, and easily offended celestial landlords who viewed humanity as a noisy tenant on a short-term lease. They invented math, then used it to count how many times their crops got washed away, a truly depressing application of a brilliant discovery. Every flood, every plague, every military defeat was just another sign that the gods were, once again, thoroughly unimpressed. After the Sumerians came the Akkadians, who introduced the novel concept of the empire. Their great leader, Sargon, decided that instead of just ruling one city, it would be much more efficient to conquer all of them. This created the world's first empire, and with it a cascade of new problems, rebellions, logistical nightmares, and the soul-crushing task of ensuring every corner of their new territory paid tribute on time. The Akkadians were eventually supplanted by the Babylonians, who gave the world one of its first and most famous legal codes, the Code of Hammurabi. It was a remarkable achievement in justice, though its principles often boiled down to, if you poke someone's eye out, we'll poke your eye out. Simple, direct, and a clear sign that civilization hadn't quite figured out the whole turn the other cheek thing yet. Then came the Assyrians, who elevated warfare from a seasonal nuisance to a full-blown national pastime. The Assyrians were the iron-fisted, heavily bearded bullies of Mesopotamia. They perfected siege warfare, psychological terror, and the art of the threateningly worded letter. Their kings boasted of their conquests with a casual brutality that could make a seasoned horror writer blush, decorating their palaces with reliefs of flayed enemies and mass deportations. They were a testament to the idea that if you can't win hearts and minds, you can always just build a bigger, nastier army. Their empire was vast, their power absolute, and their eventual collapse, like all the empires before them, spectacular and bloody. And so the cycle turned in the cradle of civilization. A city would rise from the mud, innovate and prosper. It would build towering ziggurats to appease its angry gods, and intricate canals to tame its wild rivers. It would grow fat on grain and trade, and then, inevitably, it would attract the envious eyes of its neighbors. War would follow, as predictable as the floods. Cities would be burned, fields salted, and populations scattered, only for a new power to rise from the ashes and repeat the process. Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, a 4,000-year-long story of ambition, invention, and spectacular recurring failure. It was the dawn of civilization, a messy, violent, and darkly humorous beginning to our shared human story of people who chose walls over wilderness, and in doing so created a whole new set of problems to solve and a whole new set of reasons to despair. This is just the first chapter in our journey through the dark and twisted history of our ancestors. The chaos, the calamities, and the sheer bloody-minded persistence of humanity are a story that needs to be told. If you have a thirst for the grim, the grand, and the slightly unhinged tales that forged our world, then you are in the right place. Do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. You don't want to miss the glorious train wrecks of history that we'll be exploring next. This is your daily dose of ancient chaos, and trust us, you're going to want seconds. While Mesopotamia was busy inventing new and exciting ways for cities to collapse, another civilization was taking shape just a short camel ride away. Along the banks of the Nile, a society emerged that was, if anything, even more audacious in its ambitions and more peculiar in its preoccupations. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a civilization that looked at the fleeting, chaotic nature of life and decided to spend 3,000 years meticulously planning for its end. They perfected the art of preserving a corpse, but seemed less concerned with the well-being of the living bodies that built their world. This is the story of a kingdom defined by its divine rulers, its monumental obsession with death, and the unshakable belief that you could in fact take it all with you, provided you had enough stone and enough people to haul it. The geography of Egypt was a stark contrast to the unpredictable plains of Mesopotamia. The Nile River, with its predictable, life-giving floods, created a narrow strip of impossibly fertile land, surrounded by an ocean of barren desert. This duality shaped the Egyptian worldview. There was the Black Land, the home of life, and the Red Land, the domain of death and chaos. For the Egyptians, life was a brief, precious island in a vast cosmic sea of nothingness, and the only sensible response was to build a really, really good lifeboat, or in their case, a really, really big stone tomb. This wasn't just pessimism, it was a national project, a state-posited denial of mortality on an unprecedented scale. The entire enterprise was orchestrated by the Pharaoh, a figure who wasn't just a king but a living god, a divine intermediary between the mortal realm and the cosmic order. When your boss is a deity, you tend not to argue about working conditions. The Pharaoh's well-being, both in this life and the next, was paramount because his journey through the underworld was essential to maintaining the balance of the universe, or Ma'at. If the Pharaoh successfully navigated the afterlife, the sun would continue to rise, the Nile would continue to flood, and life would go on. If he failed, well, it was eternal darkness and chaos for everyone. No pressure. This brings us to the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders. It was during this period, starting around 2686, before the Common Era, that the pharaohs began commissioning their colossal funerary monuments. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu, is a testament to this incredible ambition. It consists of 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons, all quarried, transported and assembled with breathtaking precision. It was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years, a giant, triangular testament to one man's refusal to stay dead. To build such a monument required a level of organization and manpower that is difficult to comprehend. Tens of thousands of skilled laborers and farmers, during the flood season when they couldn't work their fields, were conscripted for the royal construction project. While not exactly slaves in the traditional sense, their lives were consumed by the grueling task of hauling stone under the scorching Egyptian sun. They lived in state-provided housing, received rations of bread and beer, and had access to medical care for their inevitable injuries. It was a form of national service from which there was no honorable discharge, all for a tomb the vast majority of them would never see the inside of. The logistics were staggering. Entire cities were built to house the workforce, a vast bureaucracy. The spiritual successor to Mesopotamia's debt collectors kept meticulous records of rations, work quotas, and supplies. They were masters of project management, driven by a singular divine deadline. All this effort, all this ingenuity, all this human toil was poured into creating an eternal home for one person. Their afterlife planning was top-notch, their actual life not so much, especially if you weren't royalty. The pyramids were, in essence, the most elaborate and expensive insurance policies ever created. The interiors of these pyramids were designed to be impregnable fortresses, protecting the pharaoh's mummified body and the treasures he would need for the afterlife. They were filled with intricate passages, dead ends, and massive granite plugs designed to thwart tomb robbers. And yet, almost every single one was looted, most within a few generations of being sealed. It's a darkly comic irony that the greatest security systems of the ancient world were so consistently defeated by greed and ingenuity. It seems the only thing more eternal than the pharaoh's ambition was the human desire for a quick score. The Old Kingdom eventually collapsed under its own weight. The immense cost of pyramid building, combined with a series of severe droughts and the rising power of regional governors, led to a period of chaos and civil war known as the First Intermediate Period. The central authority of the pharaoh dissolved, and Egypt splintered into rival factions. The gods, it seemed, had left the building, and the meticulously constructed order of Mahat had shattered. It was a stark reminder that even a civilization obsessed with permanence was subject to the same forces of decay and entropy as everyone else. After a century of turmoil, Egypt was reunified, ushering in the Middle Kingdom, a period often described as a classical age of art and literature. The pharaohs of this era were more pragmatic, more concerned with the welfare of their people, or at least with projecting an image of concern. They focused on public works, like massive irrigation projects, and shifted their burial practices away from the gargantuan pyramids of old. The confidence of the Old Kingdom had been shaken, replaced by a sense of anxiety and a deeper reflection on the nature of justice and morality. The literature of the Middle Kingdom is filled with a sense of pessimism and introspection that was absent in the Old Kingdom. Stories like The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant explored themes of social justice, while The Dispute Between a Man and His Bar reads like an existential debate with one's own soul about the merits of suicide. It was a time of profound psychological depth, a realization that even if you could preserve the body, the troubles of the human heart were a far more complex matter. The pharaohs were no longer just distant, all-powerful gods. They were portrayed as lonely shepherds, burdened by the weight of their divine responsibility. Despite this newfound maturity, the Middle Kingdom was not without its own dark undercurrents. The southern frontier was fortified with a series of massive mud brick forts, marvels of military architecture, designed to control the flow of trade and people from Nubia. These fortresses, with names like warding off the bows, were grim, imposing structures, a clear sign that Egypt's relationship with its neighbors was one of domination and exploitation. The wealth of Nubia, particularly its gold, flowed north, enriching the pharaohs and funding their projects, all under the watchful eye of Egyptian garrisons. The Middle Kingdom's stability proved to be just as fragile as the Old Kingdom's. A new wave of foreign invaders, the Hyksos, swept into the Nile Delta from the northeast. Using superior military technology like the horse-drawn chariot and the composite bow, they established their own dynasty, ruling northern Egypt for over a century. For the proud Egyptians, this was a profound humiliation, a second great shattering of their world. The Hyksos were a constant, galling reminder that even the blessed land of the Nile was not immune to the chaos of the outside world. The eventual expulsion of the Hyksos marked the beginning of the New Kingdom, the most glorious and expansionist period in Egyptian history. Having learned a bitter lesson about foreign invasion, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom decided that the best defense was a good offense. They forged a professional army, embraced the new military technology of their former conquerors, and set about building an empire. This was the age of warrior pharaohs, of great conquerors who extended Egypt's borders from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. This was the era of legendary figures. There was Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who ruled for 2 decades, not as a regent, but as a king in her own right, often depicted with a ceremonial false beard. Her reign was one of peace and prosperity, marked by ambitious building projects and a famous trading expedition to the land of Punt. After her death, however, her successor, Thutmose III, attempted to erase her from history, chiseling her name and image from monuments across Egypt, a stark reminder of the precariousness of power and the fragility of legacy. Then came Akhenaten, the heretic king. He abandoned the traditional pantheon of Egyptian gods in favor of a single deity, the Aten, or the sun disk. He moved the capital to a new city in the desert, Akhetaten, and oversaw a radical revolution in art and religion. The rigid, formal style of Egyptian art was replaced with a strange, almost grotesque naturalism, depicting the royal family with elongated skulls, spindly limbs, and protruding bellies. It was a shocking break with 3,000 years of tradition, and it was deeply unpopular. Akhenaten's religious revolution was a disaster. By closing the temples of the old gods, he alienated a powerful and wealthy priesthood and a population deeply attached to their traditional beliefs. His focus on his new religion led him to neglect the affairs of state, and Egypt's empire began to crumble at the edges. After his death, his son, Tutankhamun, the famous boy king, oversaw the restoration of the old religion. Akhenaten's new capital was abandoned, his monuments were dismantled, and he was written out of the official histories, branded simply as the enemy. The New Kingdom reached its zenith under pharaohs like Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great. He ruled for an astonishing 66 years, covering the land with colossal statues of himself and temples dedicated to his own glory. He fought the Hittite Empire to a standstill at the Battle of Kadesh, a clash of superpowers that he relentlessly promoted as a stunning personal victory, even though the reality was more of a bloody draw. Ramses was a master of propaganda, ensuring that his legacy would be one of strength and divine favor, no matter the actual circumstances. But even at the height of its power, the New Kingdom was facing existential threats. A mysterious coalition of sea-borne invaders, known to the Egyptians as the Sea Peoples, was ravaging the eastern Mediterranean, toppling empires and destroying ancient cities. Ramesses III, one of the last great warrior pharaohs, managed to defeat them in a series of brutal land and sea battles, saving Egypt from the fate that had befallen the Hittites. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The wars exhausted Egypt's treasury and manpower, and the kingdom was left permanently weakened. The decline, when it came, was slow and inexorable. The New Kingdom fractured, with the high priests of Amun at Thebes effectively ruling the south as a rival dynasty. A series of foreign rulers, Libyans and then Nubians, took the throne. The once mighty empire was a shadow of its former self, a prize to be fought over by more powerful neighbors. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, and finally the Persians all conquered the land of the Nile, each leaving their mark on its ancient culture. The final indignity came with the arrival of Alexander the Great, followed by the establishment of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of Greek rulers who adopted the traditions of the pharaohs, right down to the sibling marriages. The last of this line was Cleopatra VII, a brilliant and ruthless ruler who gambled on an alliance with Rome and lost. Her death in 30 before the Common Era marked the end of the last independent Egyptian kingdom and the beginning of its absorption into the Roman Empire. For 3 millennia, the Egyptian civilization had endured, a testament to the power of a unifying ideology and a favorable geography. Their obsession with death created some of the most enduring wonders of the ancient world, monuments that still inspire awe and wonder today. But their story is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of stagnation, the corrupting influence of absolute power, and the inevitability of change. They'd planned meticulously for eternity, but they couldn't escape the relentless march of time. The tombs they built to last forever were broken into. The empire they forged with bronze and blood was conquered. The divine order they sought to maintain was shattered time and time again. Theirs is a story of incredible achievement and equally incredible folly, of a people who reached for the heavens while standing on the backs of millions of their own. It's a dark, complex, and utterly fascinating chapter in the human story. And we're just getting started. The ancient world is full of these grand, doomed enterprises and magnificent failures. From the philosophical battlegrounds of Greece to the bloody arenas of Rome, the story of civilization is a story of trial and a great deal of error. If you enjoy this journey into the darker, more absurd corners of the past, then you know what to do. Don't miss out on more historical blunders. Hit that like and subscribe button. Become a part of our community of history lovers who appreciate that the past wasn't always as golden as it's made out to be. Ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss our next descent into the glorious madness of ancient history. We have so many more blunders to uncover, and we want you right here with us when we do. While the Egyptians were busy building extravagant monuments to their egos, and the Mesopotamians were locked in a perpetual cycle of conquest and collapse, a third great civilization was quietly thriving in the vast plains of the Indus River Valley. This was the Harappan civilization, a society so advanced, so orderly, and so maddeningly enigmatic that it stands as one of the great unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. They were the contemporaries of the pyramid builders and the kings of Ur, yet they chose a profoundly different path. They didn't leave behind giant statues or boastful inscriptions. Instead, they left behind the best plumbing of the Bronze Age, and a silence so profound it echoes to this day. This is the story of a civilization that mastered the art of urban living and then, having perfected it, simply vanished. Sprawling over an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, the Indus Valley civilization, which flourished from around 3,300 to 1,300 before the Common Era, was a powerhouse of its time. At its peak, its population may have reached over 5 million people, spread across hundreds of meticulously planned towns and cities. This was no scattered collection of mud-brick villages. This was a coordinated, sophisticated urban culture on a scale previously unimaginable. And yet, for thousands of years, they were almost completely forgotten, buried under the silt of the very river that gave them life. The rediscovery of their two largest cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, in the 1920s, revealed a level of urban planning that was nothing short of revolutionary. These were not chaotic, organic growths like so many other ancient cities. They were laid out on precise grid systems, with straight, wide streets intersecting at perfect right angles. The uniformity is startling. The bricks used to build houses in Mohenjo-Daro are the same standardized size as those found hundreds of miles away in Harappa. It suggests a level of central planning and communication that is simply mind-boggling for the third millennium, before the Common Era. What truly sets the Indus Valley people apart, however, was their obsession with water. While the Pharaohs were building tombs to cheat death, the Harappans were building drains to improve life. Nearly every house in Mohenjo-Daro had its own private bathroom and a connection to a complex, city-widely covered drainage system. Think about that. While a peasant in Egypt was hauling water from the Nile and living in a mud hut, the average citizen of Mohenjo-Daro had an indoor toilet that flushed. It was a level of civic immunity that wouldn't be seen again in many parts of the world for thousands of years. This focus on sanitation and order points to a society with a very different set of priorities. Their greatest public works were not monuments to gods or kings, but infrastructure for the people. They built massive granaries to store surplus food, ensuring a stable supply for their large urban populations. They constructed elaborate wells and reservoirs to manage their water resources. Their genius was practical, civic-minded, and strangely egalitarian. It was a civilization built not for the glory of the few, but for the comfort of the many. And this is where the mystery deepens. For all their sophistication, the Indus Valley people left behind a conspicuous void. Archaeologists have searched in vain for the hallmarks of Bronze Age power. There are no grand palaces for mighty kings. There are no colossal temples dedicated to vengeful gods. There are no monumental statues of glorious rulers. The largest buildings are public structures like the so-called Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro, a large, beautifully constructed pool that was likely used for ritual purification, a sort of communal spa. The absence of royal grandeur is baffling. Who was in charge? How was this vast, orderly civilization governed? Was it a collective of city-states run by committees of priests or merchants? Were they a peaceful proto-republic? The evidence provides no clear answers. They left behind thousands of small, intricately carved stone seals depicting animals and what appears to be a system of writing, but with no grand pronouncements of power. It's as if they built a civilization and forgot to sign their work. This apparent lack of a ruling class is mirrored by a striking lack of military fortification or weaponry. While the Assyrians were decorating their walls with scenes of brutal conquest, the Harappans seem to have been remarkably peaceful. Few weapons have been found in their cities, and the cities themselves lack the massive defensive walls that were a standard feature of the time. Were they a society of pacifists, or were they so secure in their power that they felt no need for defense? It's a peacefulness that is as unsettling as it is admirable. They built amazing plumbing, then politely left, the ultimate introverts of the ancient world. Their society appears to have been stable and prosperous for centuries. They had a thriving economy, with trade networks that stretched as far as Mesopotamia. Harappan seals have been found in the ruins of Sumerian cities, evidence of a sophisticated maritime trade. They were masters of craftsmanship, producing beautiful pottery, intricate beadwork, and small, expressive terracotta figurines. They were, by all accounts, a successful and highly developed culture. And then they were gone. Around 1900, before the Common Era, this great civilization began to decline. The meticulous urban planning started to break down. Houses were built over the once pristine streets. The great drainage systems fell into disrepair. The standardized weights and measures, a cornerstone of their economic system, began to disappear. The quality of their craftsmanship declined. The entire civilization seemed to be slowly, quietly falling apart. By 1300, before the Common Era, the great cities of the Indus Valley were abandoned. Mohenjo-daro, a bustling metropolis that may have housed 40,000 people, fell silent. The granaries stood empty, the drains clogged with the dust of centuries. The people who had built this marvel of the ancient world had simply left. There are no signs of a massive invasion, no widespread destruction, no evidence of a final cataclysmic battle. It wasn't a violent death, it was a ghosting. What could have caused such a collapse? The most likely culprit is climate change. The Indus Valley civilization was dependent on a predictable monsoon season to water their crops. Evidence suggests that around the time of their decline, the climate became cooler and drier. The monsoon patterns may have shifted, leading to prolonged drought and the drying up of the Ghaggar River, a second major river system that had supported many of their cities. The very foundation of their agricultural surplus, the engine of their urban life, had crumbled beneath them. Imagine watching your world slowly die. The rains stop coming. The river that has been the lifeblood of your people for generations shrinks to a trickle and then disappears. The fields turn to dust. The granaries, once overflowing, become empty. It would have been a slow, agonizing process, a generational crisis that would have shaken their society to its core. There would have been no single dramatic event to rally against, just the quiet, relentless creep of environmental collapse. Faced with this slow magma catastrophe, the people of the Indus Valley likely did the only sensible thing. They moved. They didn't fall in a blaze of glory, they packed up and sought a better life elsewhere. The decline was a dispersal. People abandoned the great urban centers and moved to smaller villages in the east and south, adapting to a more rural, decentralized way of life. The great experiment of Harappan urbanism was over. And what of their culture, their language, their beliefs? Here the silence is most profound. Their script, a complex system of hundreds of signs, remains undeciphered to this day. We have thousands of examples of it, on seals and pottery, but no Rosetta Stone to unlock its secrets. We can look at their cities and understand how they lived, but we cannot hear their voices. We don't know the names of their kings, the stories of their heroes, or the prayers they offered to their gods. Their religion is as mysterious as their politics. The seals depict a variety of figures, including a seated, horned deity that some have called a proto-Shiva, and numerous representations of a mother goddess. The Great Bath suggests that ritual purity was important. But without any texts to explain these images, we are left to guess at their meaning. Their spiritual world is a closed book, its cover beautifully illustrated, but its pages impossible to read. The fate of the Indus Valley civilization is a haunting reminder of the fragility of even the most sophisticated societies. They were masters of their environment, brilliant engineers, and peaceful traders. They created a stable and prosperous world that lasted for centuries, but they were ultimately at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Their story is a stark warning that resonates even today, in our own era of environmental uncertainty. They were a civilization that prized order, cleanliness and community over war, glory and ego. They were the quiet neighbors of the ancient world, the ones who kept to themselves, maintained their property beautifully, and then moved out without leaving a forwarding address. Their legacy is not in grand monuments, but in the silent, grid-like streets of their abandoned cities and the elegant design of their long drive. The mystery of the Indus Valley is the mystery of a people who achieved greatness and then slipped away into the mists of time, leaving behind more questions than answers. They challenge our very definition of what a civilization should be. They prove that you don't need pyramids or palaces to build a world of wonder. Sometimes, the most impressive legacy is a well-made drain and a profound, enduring silence. Their story is one of the great forgotten chapters of human history, a tale that deserves to be remembered even if its protagonists chose to remain anonymous. It is a reminder that there are other ways to build a world, other priorities to value, and it is a testament to the fact that sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones we can never fully know. We are dedicated to unearthing these lost stories, to piecing together the puzzles of the past and giving voice to the civilizations that time has tried to forget. This channel is a quest for those forgotten histories, a journey into the dark, the mysterious, and the tragically overlooked chapters of our shared human story. If you believe that these stories need to be told, then we need your support. Help us on our quest. Take a moment to hit that like button and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel. By joining our community, you are not just watching videos, you are becoming a patron of forgotten history. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a new investigation into the blunders, the mysteries, and the marvels of the ancient world. Your support allows us to keep digging so we can bring you more tales from the timeline of ancient chaos. Thank you for watching. While the Harappans were quietly perfecting their plumbing and then vanishing without a trace, a new center of civilization was rising in the east, along the fertile banks of the Yellow River. Welcome to ancient China, a land of immense scale, epic ambition, and a history that unfolds not in a straight line but in a relentless, bloody cycle. Here, power wasn't just taken, it was granted by the heavens themselves, and it could be just as easily revoked. This is the story of dynasties that rose to glory on a divine mandate and fell into chaos, of monumental projects built on foundations of human misery, and of emperors who sought to live forever, but often just found new and inventive ways to die. The story of early China is the story of the dynasty, a ruling family that holds power for a period of time before inevitably succumbing to corruption, incompetence, or just plain bad luck. To explain this endless loop of rise and fall, the Chinese developed a concept of cosmic political science, the mandate of heaven. The idea was simple and brilliant. Heaven, a powerful and impartial celestial force, would grant a just and worthy ruler the right to govern. As long as the emperor ruled wisely, maintained harmony, and prevented disasters, he and his family would keep the mandate. But if he became a tyrant, if floods or famines ravaged the land, it was a clear sign that heaven had withdrawn its favor, giving a green light for rebellion and the rise of a new dynasty. This elegant justification for regime change was first established by the Zhou dynasty, but the first dynasty to leave behind concrete archaeological and written evidence was the Shang, who ruled from around 1600 to 1046, before the Common Era. The Shang were master bronze casters, creating intricate and beautiful ritual vessels that are among the finest metalwork of the ancient world. These weren't just decorative objects. They were essential tools for communicating with the spirit world, primarily with the ancestors of the royal family, who were believed to hold significant power over the living. Life under the Shang was steeped in ritual and a constant anxiety about the will of the spirits. To discern the future, the Shang kings practiced a unique form of divination using oracle bones. A question would be inscribed onto a tortoise shell or an ox bone, which would then be heated until it cracked. A diviner would interpret the pattern of the cracks to provide an answer, a direct message from the supernatural realm. These questions ranged from the mundane, like, will it rain tomorrow, to the profoundly serious, should we go to war? Thousands of these oracle bones have been found, giving us a direct and fascinating glimpse into the concerns of the Shang court. But there was a much darker side to Shang's spirituality. Appeasing the ancestors and the high god Shangdi often required more than just bronze vassals and cryptic cracks in a bone. It required blood. The Shang practiced large-scale human sacrifice on a level that is difficult to comprehend. When a king died, his tomb would be filled not only with treasure, but with the bodies of his servants, his guards, and sometimes hundreds of prisoners of war, all sent to accompany him into the afterlife. The foundations of their palaces and temples were often consecrated with human victims. It was a society built on a rigid hierarchy, with the king at the top and a vast expendable population at the bottom. Eventually, the Shang's cruelty and excess caught up with them. The final Shang king was said to be a depraved tyrant who built a lake of wine and a forest of hanging meat for his orgies. Whether true or not, this was the justification used by a frontier state called the Zhou to rise up and overthrow them. The Chang claimed that the Shang had become so corrupt that heaven had revoked their mandate and passed it to the virtuous Zhou leader. Thus began the longest dynasty in Chinese history, one that would last, at least in name, for almost 800 years. The early period of the Zhou dynasty was seen by later generations as a golden age of stability and righteous rule. But the Zhou's vast territory was difficult to govern directly. They solved this problem by implementing a system similar to European feudalism, granting land and authority to relatives and loyal allies in exchange for military service and tribute. This worked well for a while, but as generations passed, the bonds of loyalty between the central king and these powerful regional lords began to fray. You thought your family had drama. Try an entire dynasty, fighting over who gets the fancy chair. By the 8th century before the Common Era, the power of the Zhou kings had become purely ceremonial. The real power lay with the heads of dozens of competing vassal states. This kicked off a period of escalating chaos known as the Spring and Autumn period, named after a historical chronicle of the era. It was a time of constant warfare, shifting alliances, and political intrigue. The old feudal order was crumbling, and a brutal winner-take-all struggle for supremacy had begun. Yet, paradoxically, this era of fragmentation and violence was also one of the most intellectually fertile periods in human history. The chaos and uncertainty forced people to question everything, leading to the emergence of the 100 schools of thought. It was a philosophical blossoming born from bloodshed. Thinkers traveled from court to court, offering advice to bewildered rulers on how to survive and thrive in this new, dangerous world. 3 major schools of thought emerged from this period. First, there was Confucianism, founded by the sage Confucius. He believed that the solution to the chaos was a return to traditional values, social harmony, and a society governed by virtuous, morally upright gentlemen. He emphasized respect for elders, the importance of family, and the cultivation of personal virtue. It was a deeply conservative and idealistic vision for a world that was anything but. Then there was Taoism, a philosophy that offered a very different prescription. Attributed to the legendary figure Lao Ji, Taoism advocated for a withdrawal from the pointless strife of human society and a return to the natural order, the Tao or the Way. It was a philosophy of inaction, of yielding, of embracing simplicity and spontaneity. To a Taoist, the frantic scheming of kings and ministers was just a foolish distraction from the profound, effortless flow of the cosmos. But the philosophy that would ultimately win the day was far more ruthless. It was called legalism. The legalists had no patience for Confucian morality or Taoist passivity. They argued that human beings were inherently selfish and short-sighted, and the only way to create an orderly state was with strict, impersonal laws and harsh punishments. For a legalist, the ruler should trust no one, showed no affection, and govern through fear and a rigid system of rewards and punishment. It was a terrifyingly practical and effective philosophy for an age of total war. The spring and autumn period eventually devolved into the even more brutal warring states period. The 7 most powerful states fought relentlessly for ultimate control. Armies grew to enormous sizes and warfare became more professional and more deadly. It was a 500-year-long battle royale that culminated in the victory of the most ruthless and organized state of them all, the state of Qin. The architect of the Qin victory was its king, who, after conquering all his rivals by 221 before the Common Era, gave himself a new title, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He was a man of immense ambition, brutal efficiency, and profound paranoia. Guided by the principles of legalism, he set about creating a new, unified, and totally centralized China. He abolished the old feudal states, standardized the currency, the writing system, and even the width of cart axles to create a truly unified empire. Qin Shi Huang was a builder on an epic scale. He connected existing defensive walls in the north to create the first version of the Great Wall of China. This wasn't a noble project built by volunteers. It was a gargantuan undertaking constructed by hundreds of thousands of conscripted laborers, soldiers, and criminals. Conditions were so brutal that it became known as the longest cemetery on Earth. Many who were sent to work on the wall never returned, their bodies unceremoniously buried within the structure itself. The emperor's most famous project, however, was the one he built for his own death. Near the modern city of Xi'an, he constructed a massive underground mausoleum, a microcosm of his empire designed to protect him in the afterlife. Guarding this tomb is one of the most stunning archaeological discoveries of all time. The Terracotta Army, an entire army of more than 8,000 life-size soldiers, chariots, and horses, each with a unique face, all molded from clay and buried in pits to serve their emperor for eternity. Despite his meticulous planning for the afterlife, Qin Shi Huang was terrified of dying. He became obsessed with finding the elixir of life, sending expeditions far and wide in search of a mythical island of immortals. He consulted alchemists and mystics who promised him eternal life. Ironically, his quest for immortality likely killed him. His court doctors prescribed him pills containing mercury, a substance they believed could prolong life. In 210, before the Common Era, the first emperor died, likely from heavy metal poisoning, while on a tour of his empire. His death plunged the empire into chaos. His advisors, terrified of a succession crisis, concealed his death for weeks, filling his carriage with salted fish to mask the smell of his decomposing body as they rushed back to the capital. The Qin dynasty, designed to last for 10,000 generations, collapsed just a few years after the death of its founder, consumed by the very rebellion and chaos it had sought to suppress with such brutality. From the ashes of the Qin collapse rose a new dynasty, the Han, which would rule for over 400 years and cement the imperial structure that would define China for the next 2 millennia. The Han, tempered the harsh legalism of the Qin with the more humane principles of Confucianism, creating a durable synthesis that proved remarkably successful. But they too would eventually fall, continuing the relentless dynastic cycle of rise, glory, corruption, and collapse. The story of early China is a grand, sweeping epic. It is a tale of brilliant philosophers and brutal warlords, of incredible artistic achievement and staggering human suffering. It is a history defined by the search for order in a world that often seemed to be teetering on the brink of anarchy. The mandate of heaven provided a framework for this chaos, turning a history of bloody coups and rebellions into a cosmic drama of divine justice. From the sacrificial pits of the Shang to the terracotta legions of the Qin, ancient China offers a stark and fascinating portrait of a civilization forging its identity. It's a history written in bronze, bone, and the blood of countless millions, a testament to the enduring power of ambition and the terrifying logic of empire. It is a story of a people who believed their destiny was written in the stars, but who found it was all too often shaped by the sword. This journey through the epic cycles of ancient history is far from over. We've seen civilizations crumble into dust and empires rise from the ashes, and every story is more fascinating than the last. If you are captivated by these tales of ambition, folly, and the relentless march of time, then you are in the right place. But to continue this exploration, we need you to be a part of it. If you're finding this fascinating, you absolutely must like this video, and more importantly, subscribe to the channel. Clicking that subscribe button is your mandate to us to keep digging up these incredible stories. And be sure to ring the notification bell, so you'll be the first to know when we release our next chapter in the dark and dramatic history of the world. Don't let these stories be forgotten. Join us. As the great empires of the Near East and China were locked in their grand cycles of war and consolidation, a different kind of civilization was taking shape on the islands and shores of the Aegean Sea. This was the world of the Bronze Age Greeks, a realm of seafaring traders, warrior kings, and labyrinthine palaces. It was a world that would give birth to some of the West's most enduring myths, and then, just as suddenly, it would collapse into a dark age, leaving behind little more than enigmatic ruins and haunting legends. Welcome to the world of the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, two cultures that blazed brightly and then vanished, leaving a mystery that still puzzles us today. Our story begins on the island of Crete, the home of the Minoan civilization, which flourished from around 2700 to 1450 before the Common Era. The Minoans were not Greek. They were a distinct people with their own unique language and culture. And what a culture it was! They were the first major maritime power of the Aegean, their ships dominating the trade routes and connecting them to the great civilizations of Egypt and the Near East. They were a people who seemed to have a deep appreciation for art, beauty, and life itself. The heart of Minoan civilization was its incredible palaces. These were not the grim fortified castles of later ages. Sprawling, multi-story complexes like the one at Knossos were vibrant centers of administration, storage, and ritual. They were filled with light and air, decorated with stunningly beautiful frescoes depicting scenes of nature, processions, and enigmatic ritual. With their complex layouts of rooms, corridors, and courtyards, it's no wonder that the later Greeks remembered Knossos as the home of the legendary labyrinth, a maze built to contain the monstrous Minotaur. The art of the Minoans is a window into a world that seems remarkably cheerful and full of motion. Their frescoes depict dolphins leaping from the waves, graceful women in elaborate gowns, and men with long flowing hair. There's a sense of vitality and freedom that stands in stark contrast to the rigid, formal art of Egypt or the brutal martial art of Assyria. They seem to celebrate the natural world and their place within it, but this cheerful veneer hides some deeply strange and dangerous practices. Chief among these was the bizarre ritual of bull leaping. Depicted in numerous frescoes and on seals, this activity apparently involved young men and women somersaulting over the backs of charging bulls. Was it a religious ceremony? A rite of passage? An extreme sport for the Bronze Age adrenaline junkie? Whatever its purpose, it was an incredibly dangerous performance, a deadly dance with a half-ton beast. It speaks to a culture with a relationship to nature that was both intimate and fraught with peril. One of the most striking features of the Minoan palaces is their almost complete lack of defensive walls. In a world where warfare was a constant reality, the Minoans seem to have felt remarkably secure. Their defense was the sea itself. As a dominant naval power, they may have believed that no enemy could successfully mount an invasion of their island home. For centuries, it seems, they were right. Their palaces were open, inviting, and seemingly peaceful. But this world of art and bull-leaping was not to last. Around 1700 before the Common Era, many of the great palaces were destroyed, likely by a massive earthquake that shook the island. The Minoans, however, were resilient. They rebuilt their palaces on an even grander scale, ushering in their most prosperous and influential period. It was a golden age of Cretan power, a time when their culture and influence spread throughout the Aegean. They built beautiful palaces, then vanished like a bad dating app match. Meanwhile, on the Greek mainland, a new power was rising. These were the Mycenaeans, the first people to speak the Greek language. They were a very different kind of society from the Minoans. They were warlike, ambitious, and organized for conflict. Their centers were not open palaces, but heavily fortified citadels, built on high, defensible hills. Their walls were so massive, constructed from enormous, roughly hewn boulders, that later Greeks believed they could only have been built by the mythical one-eyed giants, the Cyclopes. The Mycenaeans were a warrior aristocracy, ruled by powerful kings known as the One-Axe. Their society was hierarchical, bureaucratic, and obsessed with martial prowess. This is the world described in Homer's epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey. A world of heroic warriors, bronze armor, and epic battles. The famous Mask of Agamemnon, a golden funeral mask discovered at Mycenae by Heinrich Schliemann, is a powerful symbol of this civilization's wealth and its focus on the glory of its warrior kings. For a time, the two cultures coexisted, with the Mycenaeans heavily influenced by the more sophisticated Minoans. They adopted Minoan art styles, religious symbols, and even their system of writing, adapting it to their own Greek language. This adapted script, known as Linear B, has been deciphered, and it gives us a fascinating, if somewhat dry, glimpse into their world. The clay tablets on which it was written are not filled with poetry or philosophy, but with administrative records, lists of supplies, troop deployments, and tax records. It reveals a society constantly mobilizing for war. The relationship between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans appears to have taken a darker turn around 1450, before the Common Era. The palaces on Crete were destroyed once again, but this time they were not rebuilt in the same way. At Knossos, the palace was taken over by new rulers who wrote in the Mycenaean Linear B script. It seems the mainland warriors had finally conquered their cultural mentors, a hostile takeover of the Bronze Age's most sophisticated corporation. The Mycenaeans now dominated the Aegean. They established a network of fortified palaces across southern Greece, from Mycenae and Tiryns in the Peloponnese to Thebes and Athens. They were traders as well as warriors, their pottery found as far away as Italy and the coast of Syria. This was their golden age, the height of their power and influence, the historical reality behind the myths of the Trojan War. But this world, too, was built on fragile foundations. The Mycenaean palace states were constantly competing with one another, and their society was a pressure cooker of internal tensions and external threats. Their obsession with military readiness, revealed in the Linear B tablets, paints a picture of a civilization on high alert, a world perpetually bracing for impact. And then, around 1200 before the Common Era, the impact came. In the space of a single generation, the entire Mycenaean world collapsed. One by one, their great citadels were destroyed and abandoned. Pylos, the home of the wise king Nestor from the Odyssey, was violently burned. At Mycenae, the inhabitants frantically tried to build underground cisterns to withstand a siege, but it was no use. The citadel fell. The entire edifice of their civilization crumbled into dust. What happened? This is one of the greatest mysteries in ancient history. The collapse of the Mycenaean world was part of a wider cataclysm that swept across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire in Anatolia was destroyed. Great cities in Syria and the Levant were burned to the ground. Egypt was ravaged by invasions from a mysterious confederation of raiders known only as the Sea Peoples. It was a world in turmoil, a perfect storm of destruction. Several culprits have been proposed for this Bronze Age apocalypse. The traditional explanation points to waves of new invaders from the north, perhaps the Dorian Greeks of later legend, who swept down into Greece and overthrew the Mycenaean kingdoms. This theory of a Dorian invasion, however, is not strongly supported by the archaeological evidence. Another popular theory is that of systems collapse. The Mycenaean world was a complex, interconnected system of trade and diplomacy. If one part of that system failed, it could have created a domino effect, leading to a cascade of failures. Perhaps a series of droughts led to famine, which led to internal rebellions and social breakdown. The palace economies, so dependent on centralized control, may have been unable to cope with the crisis. There is also strong evidence for a series of powerful earthquakes in the region during this period, which could have destroyed the palaces and disrupted the delicate infrastructure that supported Mycenaean society. It's possible that there was no single cause, but a deadly combination of factors: invasion, climate change, natural disasters, and internal strife all coming to a head at the same time. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. The collapse was total. The art of writing was lost. The population plummeted. The sophisticated techniques of architecture and art were forgotten. The once thriving trade networks vanished. Greece plunged into a dark age that would last for 400 years. Life reverted to a much simpler, poorer, and more isolated existence. The glories of the Mycenaean world survived only as fragmented memories, as myths and legends passed down orally from one generation to the next. The fate of the Minoans and Mycenaeans is a stark reminder of how quickly even the most advanced civilizations can fall. They built a world of incredible beauty, sophistication, and power. They sailed the seas, traded with empires, and constructed monuments that still inspire awe. But they were ultimately unable to withstand the forces that tore their world apart. Their palaces, once centers of vibrant life, became silent tombs. Their story is a historical puzzle, a collection of tantalizing clues and unanswered questions. Who were the Minoans, and what did they believe? What was the true nature of their bull-leaping ritual? And what, precisely, caused the sudden and violent end of their world? We are left with the echoes of their existence, the ghosts of their achievements, in the ruins of their palaces and the gold of their tombs. It is in these mysteries that the true fascination of history lies, the search for answers, the process of piecing together the fragmented story of the past, is a journey of discovery. It's a detective story on a grand scale, and every new finding brings us one step closer to understanding these lost worlds. And there are so many lost worlds to explore. If you are as fascinated by these puzzles as we are, then you are a crucial part of this investigation. By supporting our channel, you allow us to continue to delve into these historical enigmas. So, if you've enjoyed this journey into the lost world of the Bronze Age Aegean, please help us unravel more historical mystery. Take a moment to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It's the single best way to ensure that we can continue to create this content. Ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration of a collapsed civilization or a forgotten empire. Join our community and become a part of the quest. Thank you for watching. In the grand theater of ancient empires, Egypt and Mesopotamia often steal the spotlight, their stories told in towering pyramids and sprawling cuneiform archives. But while these superpowers were dominating the headlines, a formidable new player emerged from the rugged highlands of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. These were the Hittites, a hardy, pragmatic people who built an empire that would challenge the might of the Pharaohs and pioneer a technology that would change the world forever. They were the tough, unglamorous power of the late Bronze Age, a civilization of warriors, innovators, and surprisingly litigious diplomats. This is the story of an empire that rose from the mountains, forged the future in iron, and then vanished so completely it was almost lost to history. The Hittites emerged around 1650, before the Common Era, establishing their kingdom in the heart of the Anatolian plateau. Their capital, Hattusa, was a masterpiece of defensive architecture. a rugged hilltop fortress protected by massive stone walls and dramatic carved gateways depicting lions and sphinxes. This was not the open, sun-drenched landscape of the Nile or the flat plains of Sumer. This was a harsh, mountainous land that bred a tough and resilient people. Their location gave them access to abundant natural resources, particularly metals, which would become the key to their power. Before they became masters of iron, the Hittites perfected the art of Bronze Age warfare. Their most significant military innovation was a new and improved war chariot. While Egyptian chariots were light, two-man archery platforms, the Hittite version was heavier, with a crew of 3. This made it a more stable and powerful weapon, a kind of Bronze Age armored personnel carrier. With a driver, a warrior, and a shield-bearer, the Hittite chariot could charge into enemy formations, disrupt their lines, and withstand attacks in a way their rivals couldn't. It was a simple but devastatingly effective technological edge. This military prowess allowed the Hittites to expand out of their Anatolian heartland and build a formidable empire. They sacked the ancient city of Babylon around 1595, before the Common Era, a shocking feat that announced their arrival on the world stage as a major power. They were the new bullies on the block, a force to be reckoned with, and their expansion put them on a direct collision course with the other great superpower of the age, the new kingdom of Egypt. The Hittites' most significant and lasting contribution to the ancient world, however, was their pioneering work with a new and difficult metal, iron. While bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, had been the dominant material for millennia, iron was far more abundant. The problem was that it was much harder to work with, requiring higher temperatures and a more complex smelting process. The Hittites were among the first to master this technology, guarding the secret of iron working like a state secret. This technological leap gave them a significant advantage. Iron weapons were stronger and could hold a sharper edge than bronze. They invented iron, then used it to make really pointy diplomatic statements. While they never completely replaced bronze, their mastery of this new metal was a symbol of their power and ingenuity. They were, in essence, the progenitors of the Iron Age, the harbingers of a new era of technology and warfare that would eventually sweep across the ancient world. The clash between these two superpowers, the Hittite Empire and the Egyptian Empire, defined the geopolitics of the late Bronze Age. The main point of contention was control over the lucrative trade routes and buffer states in Syria and the Levant. This rivalry came to a head in one of the most famous battles of antiquity, the Battle of Kadesh, fought around 1274 before the Common Era. The Egyptian forces were led by the young and ambitious Pharaoh Ramesses II, a man who was a master of self-promotion. The Hittite army was commanded by their king, Muwatalli II. The battle was a colossal engagement, involving thousands of chariots on both sides. It was a bloody, chaotic, and ultimately inconclusive affair. Ramesses, through sheer luck and personal bravery, managed to save his army from a disastrous Hittite ambush, but he failed to take the city of Kadesh. The Hittites, while mauling the Egyptian army, were too battered to press their advantage. What followed the battle was one of the first great propaganda wars in history. Ramesses returned to Egypt and covered his temples with inscriptions and reliefs proclaiming a stunning, heroic victory. He depicted himself as a lone warrior, single-handedly smiting the terrified Hittites. The Hittite records, discovered in the ruins of Hattusa, tell a very different story, one of an Egyptian rout followed by a stalemate. It's a powerful reminder that history is not just what happened, but who gets to tell the story. Despite the blustering propaganda, the Battle of Kadesh taught both empires a valuable lesson. Neither could decisively defeat the other. The result, years later, was one of the most remarkable documents in ancient history, the Treaty of Kadesh. This was not a surrender document, but a detailed peace and alliance treaty between two equal powers. The surviving text, preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform, pledges eternal peace, mutual defense against foreign enemies, and the extradition of fugitives. It was a landmark achievement in international diplomacy, a recognition that, sometimes, talking is better than fighting. The Hittites were not just skilled warriors and diplomats, they were also sophisticated lawmakers. The Hittite laws, discovered on cuneiform tablets at Hattusa, are one of the most important legal codes of the ancient world. What makes them so fascinating is their surprisingly humane and pragmatic approach to justice. Unlike the rigid eye for an eye principle of Hammurabi's code, Hittite law often favored restitution and fines over physical punishment. For example, if you injured someone, you were typically required to pay their medical bills and compensate them for lost time at work. There was a detailed schedule of fines for various offenses, from stealing a beehive to killing a merchant. This isn't to say they were soft. Murder and treason were still capital offenses, but the overall focus was on compensating the victim and restoring social order, rather than on pure retribution. It was a legal system that was remarkably ahead of its time. The internal politics of the Hittite Empire were often a messy affair. The succession of the throne was frequently contested, leading to assassinations, coups, and civil wars. The Hittite king was not a divine being like the Egyptian pharaoh, but rather the chief priest of the state and the commander of the army, the first among a powerful and often unruly noble class. This inherent instability was a constant weakness at the heart of their empire. Their religion was as complex as their politics. They were known as the people of 1,000 gods. They adopted deities from every culture they encountered, incorporating them into their own sprawling and ever-growing pantheon. The state religion was centered on the storm god of Hatti and the sun goddess of Arina, but their archives are filled with rituals and prayers to Hurrian, Mesopotamian, and Canaanite gods. It was a uniquely syncretic and inclusive approach to religion, a reflection of their multi-ethnic empire. Despite their power, their technology, and their diplomatic savvy, the Hittite Empire was not destined to last. Like the Mycenaeans in Greece, their civilization came to a sudden and violent end around 1200. Before the Common Era, as part of the Great Bronze Age collapse, their mighty capital, Hattusa, was violently destroyed, burned to the ground, and abandoned forever. The exact cause of their collapse is still debated, but it was likely a combination of factors. The mysterious Sea Peoples, the same confederation of raiders that threatened Egypt, almost certainly played a major role, disrupting trade and raiding coastal cities. There is also evidence of prolonged drought and famine, which would have weakened the central government and led to internal unrest. The once mighty empire, a pioneer of iron, was shattered. The collapse was so complete that the Hittites were almost entirely forgotten. Their language, a member of the Indo-European family and one of the oldest to be written down, fell silent. Their great cities crumbled into ruins. For over 3,000 years they existed only as a brief and enigmatic reference in the Hebrew Bible. It wasn't until archaeologists began excavating in Turkey in the early 20th century that their lost empire was rediscovered, and their history could be painstakingly pieced back together from the thousands of clay tablets found in the ruins of their capital. The story of the Hittites is a salutary tale. They were a major world power, a civilization of innovators who stood on an equal footing with the great empires of their day. They mastered a revolutionary new technology, created a sophisticated legal system, and negotiated the world's first true peace treaty. They were a testament to the power of adaptation and pragmatism. And yet, they were just as vulnerable to the great tides of history as everyone else. Their mighty fortresses could not protect them from famine. Their iron swords could not defeat the chaos that swept across the ancient world. Their empire, which had seemed so permanent, proved to be just as fragile as those built on sand. They are the great what-if of the ancient Near East. What if their empire had survived? How would the course of history have been different? But their fate was to be a lost civilization, a silent empire whose story had to be unearthed from the dust. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that even the strongest empires can fall, and that history is full of forgotten chapters waiting to be reread. The dark and often dull corners of history are where some of the most fascinating stories lie. The tales of forgotten empires, collapsed civilizations, and pioneering innovators remind us that our own world is built on the foundations of these lost worlds. The Hittites are a prime example of a story that was almost lost to the ages. and our mission is to make sure these stories are not forgotten. We are committed to bringing you the obscure, the mysterious, and the often overlooked chapters of our shared human past. If you find this journey into the dusty archives of history as compelling as we do, then we ask for your support. Don't miss out on more dark and dull history. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It is the single most effective way to help us continue our work. Ring the notification bell to be alerted every time a new chapter of ancient chaos is uploaded. Join our community of history enthusiasts and help us keep the stories of empires like the Hittites alive. Thank you for watching. As the weary sun dips below the horizon, casting long spectral shadows across the land, let us journey back in time. Close your eyes, settle in, and allow the darkness to be your guide. Tonight, we travel not to the well-trodden paths of Rome or Egypt, but to the humid, teeming jungles of ancient Mesoamerica. Here, amidst the cries of unseen creatures and the ever-present threat of the unknown, a civilization emerged, one that would lay the very foundations for all who followed. They were the Olmecs, the rubber people, and their story, like the jungle itself, is one of deep mystery, profound artistry, and an unsettling, silent disappearance. So, breathe deeply, and let the whispers of the past lull you into a state of unease. Our story begins around 1600 BC, in the lowlands of what is now south-central Mexico. This was the Olmec heartland, a territory defined by swampy plains, meandering rivers, and dense, unforgiving rainforest. It was a place of immense natural wealth, but also of considerable danger. The jaguar, the most powerful predator in the Americas, roamed these lands, becoming a central figure in Olmec cosmology, a creature of the night, a symbol of power and the underworld. The Olmecs didn't just survive in this challenging environment, they thrived, bending the land to their will and creating a society of unprecedented complexity. They were the pioneers, the first true civilization of Mesoamerica, and their influence would echo through the ages, long after their own voices had fallen silent. The name Olmec, in the Nahuatl language of the later Aztec Empire, means the rubber people. This moniker was a nod to one of the region's most important resources, the rubber tree. The Olmecs had mastered the art of tapping these trees, harvesting the latex and processing it to create a variety of goods. Most famously, they crafted solid rubber balls, some weighing up to 9 pounds, for use in a ritualistic ballgame. This game, a deadly serious affair, was played on specially constructed courts and often had life or death consequences. It was a public spectacle, a religious rite, and a political statement all rolled into one. The bounce of the rubber ball on the stone court was the sound of Olmec power and ingenuity, a sound that would reverberate through later Mesoamerican cultures, who adopted and adapted the game for their own bloody purposes. But the Olmecs are not primarily remembered for their bouncy balls of doom. No, their most iconic and enduring legacy is far more monumental. Carved from single massive boulders of volcanic basalt, the Olmec colossal heads are a testament to their artistic skill and their sheer, audacious ambition. These are not just sculptures. They are portraits of powerful Olmec rulers, each with a unique individualistic expression. The stone from which they were carved was sourced from the Tuxtla Mountains, sometimes over 150 kilometers away from the workshops where they were finished. Lacking beasts of burden or the wheel, the Olmecs transported these multi-ton behemoths across treacherous terrain, a feat that boggles the mind and speaks to a highly organized and, likely highly coercive, social structure. Imagine the scene. Thousands of laborers, straining under the tropical sun, dragging a colossal block of stone through dense jungle and across raging rivers. The air would have been thick with the sound of their toil, the crack of whips, and the chanting of priests, all to create a monument to a single, powerful individual. 17 of these giant heads have been unearthed to date, the largest weighing in at over 50 tons. They are a stark and imposing reminder that even in the deepest recesses of history, humanity's elite have always had a flair for the dramatic and a willingness to expend the lives of many for their own immortalization. They carved giant stone heads of their leaders, Good luck moving that out of the living room. Beyond their megalithic portraitures, the Olmecs were masters of a more refined and intimate art form, the working of jade. This precious green stone, harder than steel, was a symbol of life, fertility, and the sacredness of maize. Olmec artisans with painstaking precision crafted exquisite jade masks, figurines, and ceremonial celts. These objects, often depicting supernatural beings or shamanic transformations, were not mere decoration. They were imbued with profound religious significance, conduits to the spirit world. The intricate detail and polished perfection of Olmec jade work reveal a deep understanding of their materials and a sophisticated artistic sensibility that is all the more remarkable given their relatively simple toolkit of stone, bone, and wood. The Olmecs were not just gifted artists, they were also innovators. They developed one of the first writing systems in the Americas, a complex hieroglyphic script that is still not fully deciphered. They also conceived of the concept of zero, a revolutionary mathematical idea that would be crucial for the development of the complex calendars used by later Mesoamerican civilizations. These intellectual achievements, born out of the need to record history, track celestial events, and manage a complex society, mark the Olmecs as true intellectual trailblazers. They were laying the groundwork for the Maya, the Teotihuacanos, and the Aztecs, all of whom would build upon the Olmecs' foundational knowledge. The heart of the Olmec world was not a single unified empire, but rather a series of major ceremonial centers that rose and fell in prominence over the centuries. The earliest of these, San Lorenzo, flourished from around 1200 to 900 BC. It was a sprawling, urban complex built on a massive artificial plateau and featured a royal palace, numerous plazas, and of course a collection of colossal heads. The sheer scale of San Lorenzo suggests a highly centralized and stratified society, with a powerful ruling class able to command the labor of a vast population. But the glory of San Lorenzo was not to last. Around 900 BC, the center was systematically destroyed. Monuments were toppled, sculptures were defaced, and the site was abandoned. The reasons for this collapse remain shrouded in mystery, a dark prelude to the fate that would eventually befall the entire Olmec civilization. Following the fall of San Lorenzo, the center of Olmec power shifted to La Venta, which would dominate the region from approximately 900 to 400 BC. La Venta was even more impressive than its predecessor. It was built on an island in a coastal swamp and featured a massive 100-foot-high earthen pyramid, one of the earliest in Mesoamerica. The city was a nexus of trade, drawing in goods from as far away as Guatemala and central Mexico. But La Venta was also a place of dark and bloody rituals. Excavations have revealed evidence of human sacrifice, including the remains of infants offered up to appease the gods and ensure the continued prosperity of the city. The religious beliefs of the Olmecs were as complex and enigmatic as their art. They worshipped a pantheon of deities, many of whom were depicted as hybrid creatures, blending human and animal features. The most prominent of these was the Olmec dragon, a crocodilian being associated with the earth and fertility. Another key figure was the bird monster, a raptorial bird that represented the heavens. And of course, there was the were-jaguar, a creature that was part human, part jaguar, and symbolized the power of the shaman to cross the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds. These beliefs were not just abstract concepts, they permeated every aspect of Olmec life, from their art and architecture to their politics and warfare. The Olmec diet was based on the three sisters of Mesoamerican agriculture: maize, beans, and squash. They also cultivated a variety of other crops, including chili peppers, avocados, and cacao. To support their growing population, the Olmecs developed sophisticated agricultural techniques, including slash-and-burn farming, and the construction of raised fields in the swampy lowlands. This mastery of their environment allowed them to generate the agricultural surplus necessary to support their large urban centers and their ambitious building projects. But this reliance on a narrow range of crops also made them vulnerable to environmental changes, a factor that may have played a role in their eventual decline. Olmec society was rigidly hierarchical. At the top were the rulers, who were seen as divine or semi-divine beings, intermediaries between the human and supernatural realms. Below them was a class of priests and nobles who helped to administer the state and oversee religious rituals. The vast majority of the population, however, were commoners, farmers, laborers, and artisans who formed the backbone of Olmec society. This social structure, with its vast gulf between the elite and the masses, was a common feature of ancient civilizations, and it was a model that would be replicated throughout Mesoamerica for centuries to come. As we delve deeper into the shadows of Olmec history, the picture that emerges is one of a civilization of stark contrasts. They were brilliant artists and engineers, capable of creating works of breathtaking beauty and monumental scale. But they were also a society steeped in blood and ritual, where the lines between the sacred and the profane were blurred. They were pioneers who laid the groundwork for future civilizations, but their own story ends not with a bang, but with a whimper, a slow fade into obscurity that leaves us with more questions than answers. Around 400 BC, La Venta, like San Lorenzo before it, was abandoned. The reasons for this second major collapse are once again the subject of intense debate among scholars. Some point to environmental factors, such as the silting up of rivers or a series of volcanic eruptions that could have devastated the agricultural heartland. Others suggest internal strife, a rebellion of the common people against the ruling elite, as evidenced by the deliberate defacement of monuments. Still others propose that the decline was caused by disruptions to their trade networks, cutting them off from the vital resources they had come to depend on. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The great ceremonial centers of the Olmecs were reclaimed by the jungle, their pyramids and plazas disappearing beneath a blanket of green. The colossal heads, once proud symbols of power, were toppled and buried, their stoic expressions hidden from the sun for over 2 millennia. The Olmec people did not vanish entirely, of course. Their descendants likely scattered, merging with other groups in the region, but their unique culture, their artistic traditions, and their political dominance were gone forever. The Olmecs left behind no grand epics or detailed historical records to tell us their story. We are left to piece together their history from the mute testimony of their ruins and the enigmatic symbols they carved in stone and jade. They are a ghost civilization, a phantom presence that haunts the history of Mesoamerica. Their influence is undeniable, but their voice is forever lost to the silence of the past. They are a reminder that even the greatest of civilizations are fragile, that the monuments we build to our own glory can be swallowed by time, leaving behind only riddles. As you drift now on the edge of sleep, imagine those giant stone faces, lost in the darkness of the jungle. What did they see in their time? What secrets do they keep? The Olmecs are a perfect subject for the encroaching night, a story without a clear beginning or a satisfying end. They are a testament to the fact that some of the most fascinating chapters of human history are the ones that are incomplete, the ones that leave room for our imaginations to wander in the dark. If you find yourself captivated by these whispers from the abyss, if the dark and forgotten corners of history are what you crave in the dead of night, then consider this an invitation. There are so many stories buried in the sands of time, so many silent civilizations waiting to be unearthed. By liking this video, you tell us that you want to hear more, and by subscribing, you ensure that you will never miss another journey into the shadow. It costs you nothing, but it helps us immensely to continue bringing these lost worlds to light. Think of it as a pact. You give us a simple click, and we in return will continue to be your guide through the dark corridors of the past. We will peel back the layers of time, revealing the triumphs, the horrors, and the enduring mysteries of those who came before. We will be the voice that speaks of forgotten kings and fallen empires as you drift off to sleep. So, go on, press that subscribe button. The dead have tales to tell, and we are here to listen. You won't regret it. Or perhaps, in the deepest, darkest hours of the night, you will. And isn't that so much more interesting? For now, let the story of the Olmecs settle in your mind. Picture the verdant jungles, the towering pyramids, and the solemn stone-faced rulers. Let the mystery of their rise and the enigma of their fall be the last thoughts that occupy your mind before you surrender to sleep. The night is long, and the past is a vast and shadowy landscape. There is much to explore. Let the rhythmic patter of rain in the Mesoamerican jungle be the soundtrack to your dreams. Imagine the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, a fragrant shroud over a lost world. The Olmecs may be gone, but the questions they leave behind linger in the air like a persistent mist. Who were they, really? And where did they go? The answers, if they exist at all, are buried deep, not just in the soil of Mexico, but in the collective unconscious of a continent. The echoes of the Olmecs can be found in the art, religion, and political structures of all the great Mesoamerican civilizations that followed. They were the mother culture, the wellspring from which so much flowed. Good night. As the world outside grows quiet and the shadows lengthen, let us once again embark on a journey into the annals of dark history. Tonight we turn our gaze eastward, to the arid plains of ancient Iran, where a new power was stirring, an empire of unprecedented scale and ambition. They were the Achaemenid Persians, and for a time it seemed as if the entire world would bow before their might. Theirs is a tale of grand conquests, brilliant administration, and a spectacular hubristic fall from grace. So, settle back, let the darkness envelop you, and prepare for a story of an empire that reached for everything, only to have it slip through its fingers. Our story begins in the middle of the 6th century BC with a man named Cyrus, a name that would soon echo across the ancient world. He was the ruler of a small kingdom, a vassal of the powerful Median Empire. But Cyrus was not content to be a mere puppet king. In a stunning series of campaigns, he overthrew his Median overlords, conquered the fabulously wealthy kingdom of Lydia, and then turned his sights on the crown jewel of Mesopotamia, the ancient city of Babylon. In 539 BC, Babylon fell, and Cyrus the Great, as he would come to be known, was now the master of the largest empire the world had ever seen. The Achaemenid Empire at its zenith was a behemoth. It stretched from the Balkans in the west to the Indus Valley in the east, encompassing a staggering diversity of peoples, cultures, and religions. From the sophisticated Egyptians to the nomadic Scythians, dozens of different ethnicities were now subjects of the Persian King of Kings. Managing such a vast and disparate realm was a monumental challenge, one that had brought previous empires to their knees. But the Persians were not just conquerors, they were also brilliant administrators. The architect of this administrative genius was Darius the Great, who ascended to the throne in 522 BC. He divided the empire into provinces or satrapies, each governed by a satrap or governor. These satraps were responsible for collecting taxes, administering justice, and raising troops for the royal army. To keep the satraps in line, Darius appointed military commanders who answered directly to him, and he also employed a network of spies, known as the king's eyes and ears, who traveled throughout the empire, ensuring the loyalty of his officials. It was a system of checks and balances that, for a time, worked remarkably well. To further unify his vast realm, Darius oversaw the construction of the Royal Road, a marvel of ancient engineering. This highway stretched for over 2,500 kilometers, from the city of Susa in Persia to the Aegean coast. A system of relay stations, stocked with fresh horses, allowed royal couriers to travel the length of the road in just 7 days, a journey that would have taken ordinary travelers 3 months. This rapid communication network was the nervous system of the empire, allowing the king to quickly dispatch orders and receive intelligence from even the most remote corners of his domain. But the Persians' ambition was not limited to conquest and administration. They also had their eyes on the small, fractious city-states of Greece. In 490 BC, Darius launched an invasion of Greece, seeking to punish Athens for its support of a rebellion in the Greek cities of Ionia. A massive Persian force landed at Marathon, just a short distance from Athens. The Athenians, heavily outnumbered, faced a seemingly impossible task. Yet in one of the most famous battles in history, the Athenian hoplites charged the Persian lines, inflicting a stunning and humiliating defeat on the invaders. The mighty Persian Empire had been blooded by a tiny democracy. The defeat at Marathon was a blow to Persian prestige, but it did not extinguish their desire to bring Greece to heel. In 480 BC, Darius's son and successor Xerxes I launched a second, even larger invasion. Herodotus, the Greek historian, claims that Xerxes's army numbered in the millions, a wild exaggeration, but there is no doubt that it was the largest military force ever assembled. The Greeks, facing overwhelming odds, put aside their rivalries and formed a fragile alliance to defend their homeland. The story of the Second Persian invasion is the stuff of legend. At the narrow pass of Thermopylae, a small force of Spartans and their allies, led by the indomitable King Leonidas, held off the entire Persian army for 3 days. It was a heroic last stand that ended in a glorious defeat, but it bought the Greeks precious time. In the naval battle of Salamis, the Athenian general Themistocles lured the massive Persian fleet into a narrow strait where their superior numbers counted for nothing. The smaller, more maneuverable Greek triremes decimated the Persian navy, a turning point in the war. The following year, at the Battle of Plataea, the combined Greek armies decisively defeated the Persian land forces, ending Xerxes's dream of conquest. The Greco-Persian Wars were a watershed moment in Western history. They marked the triumph of the small, independent city-state over the sprawling, centralized empire. For the Greeks, it was a victory that fueled a golden age of art, philosophy, and literature. For the Persians, it was a bitter humiliation, the first sign that their empire, for all its power and wealth, was not invincible. Their empire was huge, but their Achilles' heel was apparently tiny Greek city-states and a very ambitious Macedonian. Despite their failure to conquer Greece, the Achaemenid Empire remained a dominant force for another century and a half, but the seeds of its decline had been sown. The vast wealth of the empire bred corruption and complacency. The later Achaemenid kings were often weak and ineffective rulers, more interested in the pleasures of the court than in the business of governing. The satraps in the provinces grew more powerful and independent, often engaging in their own private wars and intrigue. The internal strife that plagued the later Achaemenid period was a constant drain on the empire's resources. Rebellions became more frequent and more difficult to suppress. Egypt, in particular, was a constant thorn in the side of the Persians, repeatedly breaking away from their control. The once mighty Persian army, while still formidable, was no longer the unstoppable force it had been under Cyrus and Darius. It was an empire slowly rotting from within. And then, in the mid-4th century BC, a new power arose on the northern fringes of the Greek world. It was the Kingdom of Macedon, and under the leadership of King Philip II, it had been transformed from a backwater into a formidable military power. Philip had unified Greece under his control, and he was planning a massive invasion of the Persian Empire, a war of revenge for the Persian invasions of a century and a half earlier. But Philip was assassinated before he could launch his invasion, and the task fell to his son, a young man of 20 named Alexander. Alexander the Great, as he would come to be known, was one of the most brilliant military commanders in history. In 334 BC, he crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor with an army of just 40,000 men. It was a ridiculously small force to take on the might of the Persian Empire, but Alexander had supreme confidence in his abilities and in the discipline and fighting prowess of his Macedonian phalanx. The Persian king, Darius III, a distant relative of his namesake, was a well-meaning but ultimately incompetent ruler. He underestimated the threat posed by Alexander, and his initial attempts to crush the invasion were half-hearted and poorly executed. At the Battle of the Granicus River, Alexander won a stunning victory, shattering the Persian forces in Asia Minor and opening the way for his advance into the heart of the empire. A year later, at the Battle of Issus, Alexander faced Darius III in person. The Persian king had assembled a massive army, but once again Alexander's tactical genius and the superior training of his troops carried the day. Darius fled the battlefield in a panic, leaving his family, including his mother, wife, and daughters, to be captured by the Macedonians. It was a devastating blow to Persian morale and a personal humiliation for the King of Kings. Darius tried one last time to stop Alexander. At the Battle of Gaugamela, in what is now northern Iraq, he assembled another enormous army, drawn from all corners of his vast empire. but the result was the same. Alexander, through a brilliant and audacious cavalry charge, broke the Persian lines and once again sent Darius fleeing for his life. The battle was a decisive victory for the Macedonians, and it effectively marked the end of the Achaemenid Empire. Following the defeat at Gaugamela, the great cities of the Persian Empire fell one by one to Alexander's army. Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, the ceremonial capital of the empire, all opened their gates to the conqueror. In a final, tragic act of destruction, Alexander's troops burned the magnificent palace of Persepolis to the ground, a symbolic act of revenge for the burning of Athens by Xerxes a century and a half earlier. Darius III, a fugitive in his own empire, was eventually betrayed and murdered by one of his own satraps. With his death, the Achaemenid dynasty, which had ruled for over 2 centuries, came to an ignominious end. Alexander was now the undisputed master of the former Persian Empire, a realm that stretched from Greece to India. The story of the Achaemenid Persians is a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the fleeting nature of power. They built an empire that was the envy of the ancient world, a marvel of organization and engineering. But in the end, they were brought down by a combination of internal decay and the ambition of a single, brilliant individual. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, let the story of the Persians be a reminder that even the mightiest empires can crumble to dust. The sands of time are littered with the ruins of civilizations that believe themselves to be eternal. The Achaemenids were just one chapter in that long and often brutal story. If this descent into the shadowed corners of history has captured your imagination, if you find solace in the stories of fallen empires and forgotten kings, then we invite you to become a part of our community of dark historians. Liking this video lets us know that you appreciate these tales from the crypt of civilization, and by subscribing, you ensure that you will be notified of our future explorations into the abyss. Your subscription is a small act, but it allows us to continue our work of unearthing these forgotten narratives. It helps us to keep the lights on in our metaphorical library of lost lore. So, if you enjoy what we do, please consider subscribing. It is the best way to support the channel and to ensure that these stories continue to be told. Think of it as a pact with the past. You give us your support, and we will continue to be your guide through the twilight realms of history. We will be the voice that whispers the tales of triumph and tragedy, of glory and ruin, as you journey into the land of dreams. For now, let the grand and tragic story of the Persian Empire fill your mind. Imagine the splendor of Persepolis, the vastness of the royal road, and the clash of armies on the plains of Marathon and Gaugamela. Let the ghosts of Cyrus and Darius, of Xerxes and Alexander, be your companions as you drift into the quiet darkness. The night is deep, and the lessons of history are many. The Persians teach us that no power is absolute, no empire is forever. They are a monument to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human folly. And in their story, we can see the reflection of our own time, a reminder that the currents of history are ever flowing, and that the future is always unwritten. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the epic and often dark tapestry of the human past. We will be here, waiting for you, when you are ready for the next story. The shadows are calling. Don't you want to answer? As the curtains of night draw closed and the hum of the modern world fades to a whisper, let us once again journey into the shadowed corridors of the past. Tonight, our destination is a land of sun-drenched islands and rugged mountains, a place that gave the world philosophy, democracy, and drama. But beneath this glittering veneer of intellectual brilliance lies a darker, more turbulent story. We are bound for ancient Greece, a civilization of profound contradictions, where strokes of genius were painted on a canvas of endless, brutal conflict. So, settle in, close your eyes, and let the whispers of history tell a tale of gods, heroes, and the glorious, bloody mess of human nature. Our story begins, not with the familiar figures of Socrates or Pericles, but on the island of Crete, around 3000 BC, with a civilization known as the Minoans. They were not Greeks, but their influence would be profound. The Minoans were a maritime people, their power radiating outwards from magnificent palace complexes like Knossos. These were not just royal residences. They were sprawling labyrinths of workshops, storerooms, and shrines, decorated with vibrant frescoes depicting bull leapers and graceful priestesses. It was a culture of artistry and trade, seemingly peaceful. But even in this early chapter, darkness lurks. The legend of the Minotaur, a monstrous creature demanding human sacrifice in the heart of a labyrinth, may be a distorted memory of a grim reality we can only guess at. Around 1600 BC, the Minoan civilization began to decline, possibly due to a cataclysmic volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera. As their power waned, a new, more warlike culture rose to prominence on the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans. These were the Greeks of the Trojan War, the people immortalized in Homer's epic poems. Their society was dominated by a warrior aristocracy, their citadels heavily fortified, their tombs filled with gold and weapons. The Mycenaeans were traders and raiders, their influence stretching across the Aegean, but their glory was to be short-lived. Around 1200 BC, the Mycenaean civilization, along with many other great powers of the Bronze Age, collapsed. The reasons are still debated. A perfect storm of invasion, famine, and systems collapse. Cities were burned, literacy was lost, and Greece plunged into a period of centuries-long decline, known, appropriately enough, as the Greek Dark Ages. It was a time of poverty and depopulation, a step backward in almost every sense. The grand palaces crumbled into ruin, and the art of writing was forgotten. The heroes of the Trojan War were now just ghosts, their stories passed down through generations of oral tradition, waiting for the light to return. And return it did. Beginning around the 8th century BC, Greece began to emerge from the darkness. The population grew, trade revived, and a new and revolutionary political unit began to take shape, the polis, or city-state. This was not a kingdom or an empire, but a community of citizens who governed themselves. Each polis was fiercely independent, with its own laws, its own army, and its own patron deity. This fragmentation would be both the source of Greece's greatest strengths and its most fatal weakness. This archaic period also saw the birth of two institutions that would define Greek identity: the Olympic Games and the Oracle at Delphi. The Olympics, first held in 776 BC, were a rare occasion when the perpetually squabbling city-states would declare a truce and compete for glory. The Oracle at Delphi, a priestess who was believed to channel the prophecies of the god Apollo, became the most important religious site in the Greek world. Kings and commoners alike would make the perilous journey to seek her cryptic guidance, her pronouncements shaping the course of history for centuries. But the defining feature of the archaic polis was its military. This was the age of the hoplite, a heavily armed foot soldier who fought in a disciplined formation called the phalanx. The phalanx was a wall of shields and spears, its success dependent on the courage and cooperation of every man in the line. This new way of warfare had profound social and political consequences. Since the hoplites were typically middle-class farmers who could afford their own armor, they began to demand a greater say in the running of their cities. The age of the aristocratic warrior king was over. The age of the citizen soldier had begun. This brings us to the classical period, the golden age of Greece, and to the city that has come to symbolize it, Athens. In the early 5th century BC, the Athenians overthrew their tyrants and established a radical new form of government, democracy, or rule by the people. It was a bold experiment, one that placed unprecedented power in the hands of ordinary citizens. But let's be clear, this was not a democracy in the modern sense. Only adult male citizens could participate. Women, slaves, and foreigners were all excluded. Still, it was a revolutionary idea, and it unleashed a torrent of cultural and intellectual creativity. It was in democratic Athens that the foundations of Western philosophy were laid. Socrates, a stonemason and self-proclaimed gadfly of the state, wandered the streets, questioning everything and everyone. His relentless pursuit of truth and his method of critical inquiry would inspire a generation of thinkers, most notably his student Plato. Plato, in turn, would go on to found the Academy, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. and to write dialogues that would shape the course of philosophy for the next 2.5 millennia. His most famous student, Aristotle, would then systematize logic, catalogue the natural world, and tutor a young Macedonian prince who would one day conquer the known world. The Athenians also invented drama, transforming it from a simple choral performance into a powerful medium for exploring the complexities of the human condition. The great playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, grappled with timeless themes of fate, justice, and the nature of the gods. Their tragedies, performed in vast open-air theaters, were not just entertainment, they were a civic duty, a way for the community to reflect on the moral and political issues of the day. They also wrote comedies, of course, most famously by Aristophanes, which were often bawdy, satirical, and brutally critical of the city's leaders. But for all their intellectual and artistic achievements, the Greeks had a fatal flaw: they simply could not get along. The fierce independence of the polis, which had been a source of such dynamism, was also a recipe for constant internecine warfare. The brief period of unity during the Persian Wars, when Athens and Sparta had joined forces to repel a common enemy, quickly evaporated. The two most powerful city-states in Greece, they were polar opposites. Athens was a democracy, a naval power with a vibrant cosmopolitan culture. Sparta was an oligarchy, a land-based military machine where every aspect of life was subordinated to the needs of the state. The inevitable clash came in 431 BC, with the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War. This was not just a war between two cities, it was a decades-long pan-Hellenic conflict that pitted Athenian democracy against Spartan oligarchy, sea power against land power. It was a brutal and destructive affair, characterized by sieges, plagues, and atrocities. The historian Thucydides, who fought in the war, wrote a chillingly objective account of its horrors, a timeless study of the corrupting influence of power and the descent of a civilized people into barbarism. They invented democracy, then immediately used it to argue about everything, usually leading to war. The Athenian assembly, once a forum for noble debate, became a stage for demagogues to whip the populace into a frenzy. In one infamous incident, the Athenians voted to put the entire male population of the rebellious city of Mytilene to death, a decision they reversed at the last minute in a fit of collective remorse. The war dragged on for nearly 30 years, bleeding Greece dry of its manpower and its moral authority. And let us not forget the foundation upon which this entire brilliant, chaotic civilization was built: slavery. Slaves were everywhere in ancient Greece, in the mines, on the farms, and in the homes of the wealthy. They were the engine of the Greek economy, their unpaid labor freeing up the citizens to pursue philosophy, art, and, of course, war. The great thinkers of the age, for all their talk of justice and the good life, saw nothing wrong with this arrangement. Slavery was simply a fact of life, a necessary evil, if it was considered an evil at all. It is a stark and uncomfortable reminder that the light of Greek civilization cast some very long and very dark shadows. Athens eventually lost the Peloponnesian War, its fleet destroyed, its empire dismantled. Sparta's victory was short-lived, however. The constant warfare had weakened all the Greek city-states, leaving them vulnerable to a new power rising in the north. This was the kingdom of Macedon, and under its ambitious and ruthless king, Philip II, it would soon put an end to the era of the independent polis. The age of glorious, self-destructive freedom was over. Philip's son, Alexander the Great, would go on to conquer the Persian Empire, spreading Greek language, culture, and ideas throughout the known world. This new era, known as the Hellenistic period, was a time of great cultural fusion and scientific advancement, but the political landscape had been irrevocably changed. The small, intimate world of the polis was replaced by vast, multicultural kingdoms ruled by Alexander. The citizen soldier gave way to the professional mercenary. The age of democracy was over, replaced by the age of absolute monarchy. The Hellenistic kingdoms would continue to flourish for a time, great centers of learning like the Library of Alexandria preserving and expanding upon the knowledge of the classical period. But they too would eventually fall, one by one, to the next great power rising in the West. Rome. The Romans, in their own way, admired the Greeks, but they had little patience for their political disunity and endless squabbling. The glory that was Greece would be absorbed into the grandeur that was Rome, its legacy preserved, but its independence extinguished forever. So what are we to make of the ancient Greeks? They were a people of breathtaking contradictions. They gave us the language of reason and the spectacle of mob rule. They championed the ideal of freedom while enslaving a significant portion of their population. They created timeless works of art, and then proceeded to smash each other's cities to rubble. They were, in short, intensely, maddeningly, and beautifully human. As you prepare to drift into the realm of sleep, let the story of ancient Greece be a complex and unsettling lullaby. It is a story with no easy heroes or villains, a testament to the fact that the brightest lights can often cast the darkest shadows. The echoes of their triumphs and their failures still resonate in our world today, in our political debates, our philosophical inquiries, and our enduring fascination with the tragic beauty of the human drama. If you have found yourself drawn into this tale of brilliance and brutality, if the complex and often contradictory nature of history is what you seek in the quiet hours of the night, then do not let our journey end here. There are countless other stories buried in the annals of time, each with its own lessons to teach, its own dark secrets to reveal. By liking this video, you send a signal into the digital ether that you want more. By subscribing, you become a fellow traveler on this ongoing exploration of our shared and often troubled past. Don't let history sleep on you. Like and subscribe. It is a simple act, but it is the lifeblood of this channel. It allows us to continue our work, to keep digging, to keep telling the stories that are too often forgotten or sanitized. Your support ensures that this beacon, however small, continues to shine a light into the shadows. We are building a community of curious minds who are not afraid to look at the past in all its glorious, messy reality. Join us. Think of it as your own personal oracle at Delphi. You ask for more dark history by subscribing, and we, in our own humble way, will deliver the prophecies of the past directly to your screen. No cryptic pronouncements here. Just the unvarnished, fascinating, and often disturbing stories of those who came before. The subscribe button is your portal to a deeper understanding of the world, one story at a time. For now, let the ghosts of Greece whisper to you in your sleep. Hear the arguments in the Athenian agora, the clash of spears in the Peloponnesian War, the final, haunting lines of a Sophoclean tragedy. The story of Greece is not just a chapter in a history book. It is a mirror in which we can see the best and worst of ourselves. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the kind of wisdom that only comes from staring into the abyss of the past and not flinching. The story of humanity is a long and winding road, and we have only just begun to explore its darkest and most fascinating detours. We will be here when you wake, ready for the next chapter. The past is waiting. As the world outside surrenders to the quiet dominion of night, let us once again embark on a journey through the shadowy landscapes of history. Tonight we set our sights on a civilization that defined the Western world, a city that grew from a humble settlement into a sprawling empire, only to crumble in the most spectacular fashion. We are going to ancient Rome, a story of unparalleled military might, engineering genius, and a political system so steeped in backstabbing it makes modern politics look like a friendly game of chess. So, find a comfortable position, let the darkness be your companion, and prepare for a tale of togas, treachery, and total collapse. Our story begins, as all good Roman stories do, with a legend. Two twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned at birth and suckled by a she-wolf. They would grow up to found a city on 7 hills, but their partnership would end in fratricide, with Romulus killing his brother and naming the city after himself. It's a grim and bloody foundation myth, and frankly, a startlingly accurate preview of the kind of political discourse Rome would become famous for. The city was founded in 753 BC, and for its first 2.5 centuries it was ruled by kings, some of whom were decidedly tyrannical. In 509 BC, the Romans had enough of kings. They overthrew their last monarch, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, and established a new form of government, a republic. The word republic comes from the Latin res publica, meaning the public thing. It was a system designed to prevent any one man from holding too much power. It was a noble idea, run by a senate of aristocrats and elected officials called consuls. In practice, it was a fiercely competitive, often violent arena for ambitious men to claw their way to the top. The early republic was defined by two major struggles. The first was external, a near-constant state of warfare with its neighbors in Italy. The Romans were exceptionally good at fighting. Their legions, disciplined, organized, and relentless, slowly but surely conquered the entire Italian peninsula. The second struggle was internal, the conflict of the orders, a centuries-long political battle between the wealthy patrician class and the common people, the plebeians. The plebs, through a series of strikes and protests, gradually won more rights and political representation, creating a more balanced, if still deeply unequal, society. Having conquered Italy, Rome's gaze turned outward, across the Mediterranean, where it came into conflict with the other great power of the region, Carthage. The Punic Wars, a series of 3 brutal conflicts fought over more than a century, were a life-or-death struggle for control of the western Mediterranean. They featured elephants crossing the Alps, stunning victories and catastrophic defeats. In the end, Rome was victorious. Carthage was utterly destroyed, its fields sown with salt, a clear and chilling message to any other power that dared to challenge the might of Rome. With Carthage out of the way, Rome's expansion went into overdrive. The legions marched east, conquering Greece and the Hellenistic kingdoms. They marched north, with Julius Caesar subjugating the tribes of Gaul in a brutal campaign that, by his own account, left 1 million dead and another 1 million enslaved. By the 1st century BC, Rome controlled a vast territory. From Spain to Syria, from the Rhine to the Nile, the wealth of the conquered world poured into the city, creating staggering fortunes for the elite and fueling a culture of conspicuous consumption. But this relentless expansion came at a terrible cost. The Republic, designed to govern a small city-state, was buckling under the strain of running an empire. The vast influx of slave labor from conquered lands drove small farmers out of business, forcing them to flock to the cities, where they became a volatile, unemployed mob. Powerful generals, commanding loyal, professional armies, began to wield more power than the Senate. The political system became paralyzed by gridlock and increasingly frequent bouts of political violence. This was the age of men like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar, charismatic, ambitious, and utterly ruthless warlords who would not hesitate to march their armies on Rome itself to achieve their goals. The late Republic was a bloodbath of civil wars, proscriptions, state-sanctioned murder lists, and political assassinations. The old rules of the Republic were dead, replaced by the simple law of the sword. The system was broken, and it was only a matter of time before someone broke it for good. That someone was Julius Caesar. After his conquest of Gaul, he defied the Senate, crossed the Rubicon River with his army, and plunged the Republic into yet another civil war. He emerged victorious, declared himself dictator for life, and began a series of reforms. But his ambition was too much for the old guard of the Senate. On the Ides of March in 44 BC, a group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators, cornered Caesar in the Senate House and stabbed him to death. They believed they were saving the Republic. In reality, they had just paved the way for something far more absolute. Caesar's assassination did not restore the Republic. It triggered another round of brutal civil wars. The ultimate victor was Caesar's adopted son, Octavian. A cold, calculating, and brilliant political operator, Octavian defeated his rivals, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and by 27 BC had consolidated all power in his own hands. He shrewdly avoided the title of king, which the Romans still despised. Instead, he called himself princeps, or first citizen, and took the honorific title of Augustus. The Republic was officially dead. The Roman Empire had begun. The first 2 centuries of the Roman Empire were a period of relative peace and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Under the rule of a series of emperors, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, and its 100 million inhabitants enjoyed a period of stability unprecedented in the ancient world. It was an era of incredible engineering feats. The Romans built over 80,000 kilometers of paved roads, Connecting every corner of their vast empire, they constructed massive aqueducts to bring fresh water to their cities, and built monumental structures like the Colosseum, a theater of death where gladiators and wild animals fought for the entertainment of the masses. The Romans also developed a sophisticated legal system, one that forms the basis of many legal codes in the Western world today. They believed in the principles of justice, due process, and the idea that the law should apply to all citizens. Of course, the reality was often different. The law was frequently used as a tool of the powerful, and the justice you received often depended on your social status. And let's not forget that this entire grand edifice was built on the backs of millions of slaves who had no rights at all. For all the stability of the Pax Romana, the imperial system had a fundamental flaw. There was no clear, legal mechanism for succession. When an emperor died, it often triggered a period of instability or even civil war, as various factions vied for power. And while some emperors, like Augustus and Trajan, were capable and effective rulers, others were not. The reigns of emperors like Caligula, who famously tried to appoint his horse as consul, and Nero, who fiddled while Rome burned, or so the story goes, are a testament to the dangers of giving absolute power to a single, often deeply disturbed individual. The stability of the Pax Romana began to unravel in the 3rd century AD. The empire was rocked by a period of intense crisis, known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. It was a perfect storm of military anarchy, economic collapse, and plague. In a span of just 50 years, Rome had over 25 different emperors, most of whom were murdered by their own troops. The empire was on the brink of total collapse, saved only by the reforms of strong authoritarian emperors like Diocletian, who divided the empire into an eastern and western half to make it more manageable. They built roads everywhere, but apparently they forgot to build a How Not to Collapse Spectacularly instruction manual. The problems that had plagued the late Republic were now returning with a vengeance. The empire was overstretched, its borders constantly under pressure from so-called barbarian tribes. The economy was in shambles, crippled by runaway inflation and excessive taxation. The once mighty legions were now filled with non-Roman mercenaries, whose loyalty was often questioned. The empire was a hollowed-out shell of its former self, a giant with feet of clay. The end for the Western Roman Empire came not with a single cataclysmic event, but with a long, slow, and agonizing decline. In 410 AD, the city of Rome, which had not been breached by a foreign enemy in 800 years, was sacked by the Visigoths. It was a devastating psychological blow from which the empire would never recover. Over the next several decades, the western provinces were overrun by various Germanic tribes. The final, almost comically anticlimactic, act came in 476 AD, when a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, a young boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus. The fall of Rome was not the end of the story, of course. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire with its capital at Constantinople, would survive for another 1,000 years. But in the West, the collapse of imperial authority plunged Europe into a centuries-long period of fragmentation and decline, the so-called Dark Ages. The roads fell into disrepair, the aqueducts crumbled, and the great cities of the Roman world shrank into shadows of their former selves. So what is the legacy of Rome? It is a legacy of profound and unsettling contradictions. They were builders and destroyers, lawgivers and tyrants, civilizers and enslavers. They created an empire of remarkable diversity and stability, but their insatiable hunger for conquest and their political dysfunction ultimately consumed them. Their story is a timeless and cautionary tale about the fragility of even the most powerful of human institutions. As you lie on the precipice of sleep, let the grand and tragic epic of Rome wash over you. Imagine the tramp of legions on a paved road, the roar of the crowd in the Colosseum, the whispers of assassins in the Senate House. The story of Rome is a story of ambition, power, glory, and decay, a drama played out on the grandest of stages. If this journey into the heart of Roman darkness has piqued your interest, If you find a strange comfort in the stories of empires rising and falling, then we invite you to join our legion of historical explorers. Hitting that like button tells the great algorithm of our time that you appreciate these forays into the past. And subscribing? That is your pledge of allegiance to our ongoing mission to uncover the dark, dusty, and often hilarious corners of history. Hit that like button and subscribe for more historical hilarity. Honestly, it's the least you can do. We're out here, metaphorically digging through ruins and deciphering ancient texts, all for your nocturnal listening pleasure. Your subscription is the fuel that powers our time machine. It ensures we can keep bringing you these tales of epic fails and spectacular collapses. Don't leave us hanging like the last Roman emperor. Join our community. Think of subscribing as your own personal triumph, a victory parade for historical knowledge. You click the button, we provide the content. It's a symbiotic relationship, much healthier than the one between most Roman emperors and their Praetorian Guard. So go on, secure your place in our annals. The historical hilarity awaits. For tonight, let the ghosts of Rome be your guides into the land of dreams. Let their story serve as a powerful reminder that even the eternal city can fall, that even the most impressive civilizations are built on foundations that can crack and crumble. The echoes of Rome are all around us, in our languages, our laws, and our architecture, but so too are the warnings of their spectacular demise. Good night, and may your dreams be free of barbarian invasions and political assassinations. The past is a vast and fascinating ruin, and we have only just begun to explore its darkest chambers. We will be here when you are ready for the next story, waiting to guide you through another chapter of our shared and often deeply flawed human story. The empire of history is vast. Let's conquer it together. As the world outside falls silent and the day's anxieties begin to recede, let us once again venture into the twilight of history. Tonight, our journey takes us deep into the heart of the Central American rainforest, to a world of towering pyramids, intricate carvings, and profound cosmic mysteries. We seek the Maya, a civilization that reached astonishing intellectual heights, only to vanish into the jungle, leaving behind more questions than answers. So, settle in, let the darkness be your guide, and prepare for a story of celestial genius, ritual bloodshed, and a collapse that was anything but predictable. Our story unfolds in the lush, unforgiving lowlands of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, and Belize. This was not an empire in the Roman or Persian sense, but a collection of powerful, independent city-states, each ruled by a divine king, who served as an intermediary between the mortal and supernatural realms. Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and Copan were the glittering and often warring jewels of the classic Maya period, which flourished from roughly 250 to 900 AD. These were not mere collections of huts. They were sprawling urban centers with magnificent stone palaces, bustling plazas, and soaring temple pyramids that scraped the jungle canopy. The Maya were, without a doubt, intellectual giants. They developed the most sophisticated writing system in the pre-Columbian Americas, a complex script of hieroglyphs that recorded their history, mythology, and astronomical observations. For centuries, these glyphs were a mystery, their meaning lost to time, but thanks to the painstaking work of epigraphers, we can now read the stories carved in stone, the tales of royal dynasties, cosmic events, and the bloody rituals that bound their society together. They were also brilliant mathematicians. The Maya independently developed the concept of zero, a revolutionary abstract idea that allowed them to make complex calculations and to create a calendrical system of breathtaking accuracy. They didn't have just one calendar, they had several, all intricately interwoven. The Tzolk'in was a 260-day ritual calendar, while the Hab was a 365-day solar calendar. These two calendars ran in a 52-year cycle, at the end of which the Maya believed the world was vulnerable to chaos and renewal. But the most famous of their calendrical creations is the long count. This was a continuous, linear calendar that began at a mythical creation date in 3114 BC and could track vast spans of time. It was this calendar that led to the infamous 2012 prophecy, a misunderstanding of the end of a major cycle, not the end of the world. They predicted the end of the world, but apparently not their own. The irony is as thick as the jungle that eventually consumed their cities. This obsession with time was driven by a deep-seated belief in a cyclical universe. The Maya were meticulous astronomers, their observations made with the naked eye from specially constructed observatories. They accurately charted the movements of the sun, the moon, Venus, and the stars. These celestial events were not just scientific curiosities. They were divine omens that dictated everything from the timing of religious ceremonies to the launching of military campaigns. The sky was a sacred text, and the Maya kings and priests were its most dedicated readers. But the Maya cosmos was not a peaceful place. It was a world of powerful, often capricious, gods who demanded constant appeasement. The shedding of blood was seen as a sacred duty, a way to nourish the gods and maintain the cosmic order. This was not just about human sacrifice, though that certainly happened. The most common form of bloodletting was auto-sacrifice, with nobles and royals piercing their own tongues, ears, and other body parts with obsidian blades and stingray spines. The blood was collected on paper and burned, the rising smoke a communion with the divine. The kings, or Ke'ul Ajal, holy lords, were at the center of this ritual universe. They were shamanistic figures, believed to be able to journey to the supernatural world in visionary trances. Their portraits, carved on stone stelae, depict them bedecked in elaborate costumes, performing sacred dances and wielding symbols of power. But their divinity was not guaranteed. They were expected to be successful war leaders, to ensure agricultural prosperity, and to maintain the delicate balance with the gods. Failure in any of these areas could have disastrous consequences, not just for the king, but for his entire kingdom. And warfare was a constant feature of the classic Maya landscape. The city-states were locked in a perpetual dance of diplomacy, alliance-building, and brutal conflict. These were not just squabbles over territory, they were existential struggles for dominance. The goal was often not to conquer and absorb a rival kingdom, but to capture its king, humiliate him, torture him, and then sacrifice him in a grand public spectacle. The carvings and inscriptions of the Maya are filled with graphic depictions of these grim events, a stark reminder that for all their intellectual brilliance, this was a deeply violent society. For centuries, the Maya civilization thrived in this volatile environment. They developed sophisticated agricultural techniques, including raised fields and terracing, to support their growing populations. They built causeways known as sakbeb to connect their cities. They created exquisite works of art, from intricate jade masks to beautifully painted ceramics. They were a civilization at the peak of its powers, seemingly destined for greatness. And then, it all fell apart. Beginning in the late 8th century AD, the southern lowlands, the heartland of the classic Maya, began to experience a rapid and catastrophic decline. The great cities were abandoned, one by one. The construction of monuments ceased. The long count calendar was no longer updated, and the jungle began to reclaim what had been so painstakingly carved from it. Within a century, this once vibrant civilization had collapsed, its people scattered, its magnificent cities left to the jaguars and the snakes. The collapse of the classic Maya is one of the great mysteries of archaeology. There was no single cause, but rather a perfect storm of converging calamities. One of the key factors appears to have been environmental degradation. The Maya had pushed their environment to its limits. The construction of their massive cities required vast quantities of wood and limestone, leading to widespread deforestation. This in turn led to soil erosion and a disruption of the local rainfall patterns. Compounding this environmental stress was a series of prolonged and severe droughts. Scientific evidence from lake sediments and cave formations indicates that the 9th and 10th centuries were a period of intense aridity in the Maya lowlands. In a society so dependent on agriculture, these droughts would have been catastrophic, leading to crop failures, famine, and social unrest. The gods, it seemed, were no longer listening. The endemic warfare that had always been a feature of Maya society likely intensified during this period of scarcity. As resources dwindled, the competition between city-states would have become even more desperate and brutal. The inscriptions from this period speak of increasing conflict and political instability. The divine kings, unable to bring rain or secure victory in battle, would have lost their authority, their legitimacy crumbling along with their cities. It was a domino effect. Environmental collapse fueled famine and war, which in turn led to political and social disintegration. The complex systems that had supported Maya civilization for centuries simply broke down. The people, stripped of their faith in their rulers and their gods, simply walked away, abandoning the great stone cities and seeking a new life elsewhere. It was not a sudden apocalypse, but a slow, agonizing slide into oblivion. It is important to remember that the Maya people did not disappear. The collapse was centered in the southern lowlands. In the northern Yucatan Peninsula, Maya cities like Chichen Itza and Mayapan would continue to thrive for centuries, albeit with different political and cultural structures. The descendants of the Maya are still with us today, millions of people who speak Mayan languages and maintain many of their ancient traditions. But the glory of the classic period, the age of the divine kings and the great jungle cities, was gone forever. The story of the classic Maya is a haunting and cautionary tale. It is a story of a civilization that reached for the stars but forgot to pay attention to the earth beneath its feet. They mastered the complexities of time but were ultimately undone by the simple realities of climate. Their collapse is a stark reminder that even the most sophisticated societies are vulnerable, that the intricate web that holds a civilization together can be surprisingly fragile. As you drift now on the gentle currents of approaching sleep, let the silent, vine-choked ruins of the Maya cities fill your imagination. Picture the towering pyramids, their stone facades once painted in brilliant colors, now gray and weathered by centuries of rain and sun. Hear the echo of a civilization that was both brilliant and brutal, a people who could map the heavens but could not save themselves. If this journey into the heart of the Mayan mystery has captivated you, if you find that the stories of lost civilizations and their enigmatic ends are the perfect companions for the quiet of the night, then we invite you to continue this exploration with us. The dull history you might have learned in school is not what we do here. We delve into the shadows, the mysteries, and the uncomfortable truths. By liking this video, you tell us that you too are drawn to these darker corners of the past. And by subscribing, you ensure that you will never miss an episode of our historical deep dives. Keep the dull history flowing, like and subscribe. Your subscription is the lifeblood of this channel. It allows us to keep digging, to keep questioning, and to keep bringing you these narratives from the edge of time. It costs you nothing, but it means the world to us. You are not just a viewer, you are a patron of the past. Think of it as an offering, not of blood like the Maya, but of a simple click, an offering that helps to nourish this channel and keep the stories of these lost worlds alive. We are building a community of people who understand that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a series of compelling, often tragic human stories. We want you to be a part of it. For now, let the mystery of the Maya be your final thought before sleep. Let the rustle of leaves in the jungle be the whisper of their ghosts. What was it like to watch their world unravel, to see the temples fall silent and the fields turn to dust? The Maya left us their calendars and their questions, a legacy written in stone and silence. Good night, and may your dreams be as deep and as mysterious as a jungle cenote. The past is a vast and shadowed landscape, and there are so many more ruins to explore, so many more mysteries to ponder. We will be here, waiting for you when you are ready to continue the journey. The night is dark and full of stories. As the world outside hushes and the comforting cloak of night descends, let us once again embark on a journey into the quiet, forgotten corners of history. Tonight, we travel to the bone-dry coastal plains of southern Peru, a landscape so arid it feels alien. Here, a mysterious culture emerged, one that etched giant, enigmatic figures into the desert floor and then, seemingly, vanished into the thin, dry air. They are the Nazca, and their story is one of incredible ingenuity, profound artistry, and a silent, perplexing end. So, settle back, Let the darkness sharpen your senses, and prepare for a tale of desert gods, disembodied heads, and a civilization that left the largest art installation in history. Our story begins around 100 BC in the river valleys that cut across the coastal desert of southern Peru. This is one of the driest places on Earth, a region where rain is a rare and sacred event. It is a challenging place to call home, to say the least. Yet it was in this harsh environment that the Nazca civilization took root, flourishing for some 7 centuries. They were not a unified empire, but rather a collection of chiefdoms. Their social and religious life centered around a major ceremonial site called Cahuachi, a place of earthen mounds and adobe pyramids that overlooked the stark desert landscape. The Nazca are best known, of course, for the Nazca lines, scratched into the surface of the desert pampa. These are a colossal collection of geoglyphs, vast drawings created by removing the reddish-brown iron oxide-coated pebbles to reveal the lighter-colored ground beneath. There are hundreds of these figures, ranging from simple geometric shapes and long, straight lines to enormous, stylized depictions of animals, birds, and plants. There are hummingbirds, spiders, monkeys, and even a figure that some have dubbed the astronaut. These are not drawings you can appreciate from the ground. Their true form is only visible from the air, from the vantage point of the gods they were likely intended for. The sheer scale and precision of the lines are mind-boggling. Some of the straight lines run for kilometers across the desert, perfectly undeterred by the uneven terrain. The biomorphs, the animal figures, are drawn with a single continuous line, a feat of remarkable planning and execution. How did they do it without an aerial view? The most likely answer is that they used simple tools and survey techniques, scaling up small models into the landscape. But the how is in many ways less interesting than the why. What possessed a people to undertake such a monumental, labor-intensive project? The truth is, we don't really know. Theories about the purpose of the lines are as numerous as the figures themselves. Some have suggested they are a giant astronomical calendar, aligned with the stars and solstices. Others believe they are ceremonial pathways, routes for ritual processions. A more compelling theory links them to water, the most precious resource in this arid land. The animal figures often correspond to creatures associated with water or fertility in Andean cosmology. The lines, in this view, were a form of prayer, a massive, desperate appeal to the gods to bring the life-giving rains. But the Nazca did not just rely on prayer to survive. They were also master engineers, and their most impressive, if less famous, creation lies hidden beneath the ground. To farm in this hyper-arid environment, they constructed an elaborate system of underground aqueducts known as puquios. These were subterranean canals, sometimes reinforced with stone, that tapped into underground water sources and carried them for miles to their fields. This ingenious system allowed the Nazca to cultivate maize, beans, squash, and cotton in a place that should have been barren. The puquios were the lifeline of the Nazca, a hidden testament to their deep understanding of their environment. Above ground, the Nazcas expressed their vibrant culture through their pottery. They were masterful potters, creating polychrome ceramics adorned with a dazzling array of colors. Their vessels are a window into their world, decorated with images of farmers, fishermen, and mythical beings. The style is bold and graphic, the subjects often surreal. We see strange hybrid creatures, part human, part animal, their faces often contorted in ecstatic or terrifying expression. It is an art that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling, a glimpse into a worldview that was rich, complex, and likely very, very different from our own. One of the most recurring and most disturbing motifs in Nazca art is the trophy head. These are not just generic symbols of warfare. They are detailed, individualized portraits of severed human heads, their lips often pinned shut with cactus spines. Archaeological evidence confirms that this was not just an artistic fancy. The Nazca practiced headhunting, and these trophy heads were likely taken from enemies defeated in battle. They were powerful symbols of prowess and prestige, perhaps used in rituals to enhance the spiritual power of the victor. It is a grim reminder that life in the Nazca world was not all beautiful pottery and elegant geoglyphs. The ceremonial center of Cahuachi was the heart of Nazca religious life. It was not a true city in the modern sense. but a place of pilgrimage, a vast sacred landscape where people from the surrounding valleys would gather for important rituals. Here, amidst the adobe pyramids, archaeologists have found evidence of feasting, music, and sacrifice. The trophy heads likely played a central role in these ceremonies, their presence a stark and brutal display of power. Awuchi was a place where the human and divine worlds intersected, a stage for the great dramas of Nazca cosmology. But for all their ingenuity and artistry, the Nazca were living on a knife's edge. Their survival was entirely dependent on a fragile and unforgiving ecosystem. They were engaged in a high-stakes gamble with the environment, their complex irrigation systems a brilliant but ultimately vulnerable solution to the problem of water scarcity. And for centuries the gamble paid off. Their population grew, their culture flourished, and their giant drawings multiplied across the desert floor. But the gods of the desert are fickle, and the luck of the Nazca was about to run out. Around 500 AD, something began to go wrong. There is growing evidence that the Nazca's own actions may have contributed to their downfall. To fuel their fires and to clear land for agriculture, they cut down the native harango trees. These trees were a keystone species, their deep roots holding the fragile soil together and helping to regulate the ecosystem. With the trees gone, the Nazca landscape became even more vulnerable to the whims of the climate. The final blow appears to have been delivered by Mother Nature herself. Around the middle of the 6th century, a massive El Niño event struck the coast of Peru. This would have caused catastrophic flooding, washing away fields and destroying the delicate irrigation systems that were the lifeblood of the Nazca. The floods, in turn, were likely followed by a prolonged and devastating drought, lasting for several decades. For a civilization already under environmental stress, it was a 1-2 punch from which they would never recover. The archaeological record from this period tells a grim story. Cahuachi was abandoned, its pyramids intentionally buried. The production of fine pottery ceased. The society that had created the magnificent lines and the sophisticated puquillos began to disintegrate. Famine and social strife would have been rampant. The trophy heads, once symbols of victory, may have become symbols of a society turning on itself in its final, desperate throes. They drew giant pictures for the gods, then apparently packed up and left. Maybe the gods weren't impressed. Or perhaps the gods they were trying to appease were the very forces of nature that they had unwittingly helped to unleash against themselves. The collapse of the Nazca was not a sudden event, but a slow, painful process of decline and abandonment. The people did not simply vanish, they likely scattered, their descendants absorbed into later cultures that rose in the region, but their unique and brilliant civilization was gone forever. The Nazca lines, their most enduring legacy, lay silent and forgotten for over 1,000 years, their secrets preserved by the dry desert climate. They were only rediscovered in the 1920s, with the advent of commercial aviation in Peru. Since then, they have fueled endless speculation, from serious scientific inquiry to the wild fantasies of ancient astronaut theorists. They are a blank canvas onto which we can project our own sense of wonder and our own search for meaning in the face of the unknown. What the Nazca teach us is that human ingenuity, even at its most brilliant, is no match for a hostile environment, especially when we fail to understand the delicate balance of the ecosystems we depend on. They were a people who could engineer a desert to their will, who could create art that speaks to the heavens, but who could not, in the end, outrun the consequences of their own actions. Their story is a silent, stark warning, etched into the desert floor for all time. As you settle deeper into the quiet of the night, imagine the vast, empty expanse of the Nazca Desert. Picture the silent figures of the hummingbird, the spider, and the monkey, their forms only visible from a divine perspective. They are a testament to a faith so strong it moved mountains, or at least a great many pebbles. But they are also a monument to a civilization that is no more, a culture that gambled against the desert and lost. If this journey into the enigmatic world of the Nazca has stirred your curiosity, if you find that the stories of lost peoples and their mysterious legacies are the perfect accompaniment to the encroaching darkness, then we humbly ask you to join our community of historical explorers. The past is full of strange and wonderful tales, and we are dedicated to unearthing them. Liking this video is a simple way to show your appreciation and to help others discover these forgotten worlds. And by subscribing, you become a card-carrying member of our society of historical spelunkers. Don't be a historical recluse, like and subscribe. Your subscription is what allows us to keep the lights on in our dusty archives, to keep funding our expeditions into the obscure corners of the past. It's a simple click for you, but it's a lifeline for us. Help us continue to bring these stories out of the shadows and into the light. Think of it as your own personal geoglyph, a signal to us and to the wider world that you value these explorations of our shared and often baffling human story. We are building a community for those who know that history is more than just names and dates. It's a collection of epic mysteries waiting to be solved. We want you on our team. For now, let the silent, sprawling mystery of the Nazca Lines be the final image in your mind before you drift off to sleep. Let their story be a reminder that even the most ambitious human endeavors can be swallowed by the sands of time, leaving behind only riddles. The Nazca are a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and the equally enduring fragility of human civilization. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the vast, silent beauty of the desert at night. The past is a lonely and fascinating place, and we are privileged to be able to visit it together. We'll be here, waiting for you, when you're ready for the next journey into the heart of historical darkness. The sands of time are always shifting, revealing new mysteries. Let's explore them together. As our long journey through the shadowed ruins of the ancient world comes to a close, let the darkness be a comforting blanket. We have walked with kings and philosophers, with engineers and shamans. We have seen civilizations rise from the mud of Mesopotamia and etch their stories onto the desert floor. And in every tale, from the jungles of the Olmec to the rubble of Rome, a single, hilariously grim lesson echoes through the ages. Humanity is exceptionally good at building magnificent things, and, even better, at spectacularly wrecking them. We began in the Fertile Crescent, where the Sumerians first figured out how to write, build cities, and almost immediately how to wage war over water rights and the proper worship of irritable mud gods. Then we traveled to Mesoamerica to meet the Olmecs, who carved giant stone heads of their leaders, a home-decorating choice of intimidating proportions, before mysteriously packing up and vanishing, leaving their stoic-faced monuments to be swallowed by the jungle. They were the mother culture, a ghost that taught everyone else how to be a civilization and, perhaps, how to disappear. We saw the Achaemenid Persians build an empire of staggering size and efficiency, with roads so good you could get news from one end to the other in a week. They had it all, but their fatal flaw was an obsession with a small collection of argumentative, toga-wearing city-states. The Greeks, for their part, invented democracy, philosophy, and drama, and then promptly used these tools to argue themselves into constant bloody civil wars. They were brilliant, but their primary export, alongside olive oil and marble, was existential dread. Then came the Romans, the ultimate overachievers. They conquered nearly everything, built aqueducts and legal systems that still boggle the mind, and perfected the art of political backstabbing. They built an empire so vast and powerful it seemed eternal, then proceeded to mismanage, inflate, and assassinate it into a slow, agonizing, and truly epic collapse. They gave us roads, but as it turns out, all roads eventually lead to ruin, especially when you forget to pay the legion. In the Americas, the Maya, with their genius for mathematics and astronomy, mapped the cosmos and created calendars of breathtaking complexity. They foresaw the end of great cycles, but somehow missed the memo about deforestation and catastrophic drought in their own backyard. Not to be outdone in the enigmatic collapse department, the Nazca of Peru engineered the desert to bloom and drew giant pictures for their gods, only to have their society unravel, possibly because the gods they were trying to impress were the very forces of nature they were inadvertently angering. From Mesopotamia's mud to Rome's rubble, these ancient civilizations, for all their grandeur, offer a hilariously grim lesson. No matter how impressive your pyramids or how vast your empire, hubris, bad weather, and a knack for self-sabotage are usually just around the corner. They all rose, they all fell, and often it was a spectacular mess. Their stories are the grand repeating cycles of human ambition running headfirst into the brick wall of reality. So, as you drift to sleep, remember the endless cycles of human ambition and absurdity. Be grateful for modern plumbing, predictable weather, and the comforting knowledge that at least your empire probably won't crumble overnight. Probably. The past is a vast cemetery of brilliant ideas and failed states, a testament to the fact that we have always been this way. Clever, creative, and just a little bit self-destructive. It is the great unifying theme of our shared and deeply flawed history. Thanks for listening tonight, and may your dreams be peaceful and your history lessons profoundly dull. If you've enjoyed our little tour through the graveyards of greatness, if you appreciate history with a healthy dose of gallows humor, then don't let this be the end. The archives of human folly are vast and deep, and we have so many more disasters to explore. Hit that like button, and more importantly, subscribe. It ensures you'll never miss another eulogy for a lost civilization. It's the best way to guarantee that the dark, hilarious, and strangely comforting stories of the past will always find their way to you in the quiet of the night. Good night.